Good day, everyone. Welcome to Deku Universe. Today we are beginning part 1 of What If Deku Became the White Dragon Emperor? The fanfiction is created by NINJ 45 Word on archive of ourown.org. Now, let's begin. Life was always torture for Midoriya Izuku. Ever since his mother and father had died when he was younger, he'd always been alone. It was a foregone conclusion for him, as he'd never been around anyone who ever liked him. And because of his orphan-like state, everyone made it his problem to deal with their anger. Izuku was not one to take these things without at least trying to give the people some kind of reason to not fight him all the time. But ever since his quirkless diagnosis getting out to those within his school district, he was treated as though he were a blight on the world. Every time he was walking home from school, he'd find himself being followed back by bullies. Sometimes people who had wanted to kidnap him. But due to his small stature, he was always capable of getting away without getting seen by those who chased after him. He'd always been a very fast runner. It was the one thing he decided to do after the death of his father when he was 5. The man had been a Japanese-American fitness instructor. And the man had taught Izuku that being fit was the only way to make sure he could escape those who bullied him at school. The man never taught him how to fight back due to him being a literal 5-year-old. But when his parents were both killed when he was 5 years old, he didn't know what to do. Nobody wanted to adopt the quirkless 5-year-old child and went after those who had a quirk, so that made Izuku far more distant with those who really didn't want to associate with him. Even the orphanage he lived within had been very distant with him concerning the whole quirkless diagnosis he had on his medical file. Back to life, being an absolute CNT to Midoriya Izuku. The young man was currently 13 years of age and walking to his local middle school of Aldra Junior High. It wasn't a very good middle school, but it was something for him at least, if it taught him anything useful that he didn't know at least. The fact that Izuku learned more about the things he had tested in class, due to the library not too far away from the orphanage, spoke a lot about the life he lived. He was hated in the orphanage he lived in, he was hated at school, he was hated by his peers, and his bullies always made comments about his parents hating him enough to allow themselves to be killed literally 8 years ago. He never let their words get to him, though, because that meant they would be getting a rise out of him. But he never let them know that their words hurt, entering the classroom with nothing more than a dulled expression as though he were waiting for his bullies to do something like usual. The teacher came in before they could. The teacher spoke about how everyone needed to choose their own career profession that they wished to do when they reached the age of around 18. Izuku had originally wanted to become a hero. He still did. But after all these years of training himself via running around Musutafu, he was beginning to doubt his own strengths. He had trained himself both mentally and physically so that he could at least take the entrance exams for UA. But when he thought about it, he'd never be capable of even destroying a single robot due to the fact that he'd never trained himself in physical strength to increase his maximum damage he could potentially do. Shaking his head at the teacher, Izuku had forgotten that when the teacher was talking about who wanted to go to UA, that he had signed up for UA as well. Oh, Midoriya, it says here that you wish to join UA as well. Is that true? The teacher asked, a bored expression on their face. Why, yeah. But I am only going for the General Education C course, Izuku stated, as the teacher blinked for a moment. Wait, really? The teacher asked, before looking over the paper. Sure enough, written under the courses within UA's high school, Izuku's name was written under the General Education tab. Well, the teacher went to say before being interrupted. Okay, what the hell is wrong with you, you dim-in nerd? You were always spouting about becoming a hero without a quirk. Now you're not wanting to? What gives? Bakugo called out, as the other students looked at him like he was crazy. Now you're mad at him for not wanting to become a hero. What the hell are you talking about, Bakugo? He's quirkless. He can't become a hero, even you say that. Last time I checked, being smart doesn't allow one to get into UA, but whatever. Random students called out. I just don't wish to be a C competitor. Izuku mumbled as Katsuki bounded over. Tell me what you were planning, you DMN nerd. You never act like this. Katsuki growled. Izuku gave the boy a look as though he were trying to not remember what happened the previous few weeks prior to this day. Shaking his head slightly, Izuku turned his gaze down as he tried to not remember his idol's words to him a few weeks ago after being saved by All Might. Tell me, DKU, why are you acting like you lost your will TOF live? Bakugo called out, causing everyone in the room to flinch, even the teacher. My idol told me that I couldn't become a hero, not without a quirk. I'd rather not talk about it much more. Izuku retorted whilst his breathing spiked a little. Bakugo, out of either pity or rage, induced confusion, just let Midoriya be and walked back to his seat. Everyone in the school knew that Izuku's idol was the same person as Katsuki's idol, and although they viewed the man in different ways for their idolization of the man, the entire school knew that when Izuku spoke, he never could actually lie to anyone he spoke to. It was incredibly difficult for him to lie to anyone, not like he had anyone to lie to. Once the school day was over, Izuku was shown walking home from school as he thought back to the day when his idol told him his dream was unattainable. 2 weeks ago, Izuku walked out of an alleyway that had been the associate to hiding his beaten and hurt form for about an hour after school had ended. The boy walked out with a small hobble in his steps as he'd been beaten to the point that one of his legs just refused to actually work properly. And as he limped down the road with each and every single person who looked in his direction, just gave him a cursory glance before continuing on their day, just hurt his heart a little, but more. It wasn't as though he would have informed him what he'd been through. The looks they gave him were that of indifference, pity, and a bit of grim satisfaction of how he appeared. He never even met these people, and they gave him glances like that, and he could easily tell satisfaction from a mere glance. The way their eyes smiled when they took upon his form that was scuffed and slightly burnt and smelling of caramel-like smoke gave away their true nature. The boy slowly pushed by them, softly, not wanting to garner enough attention to make them turn their anger of the day onto him and make his already bad day worse. By the time Izuku came towards an underpass, the boy couldn't push himself further with his injured leg as he stopped before checking up on the limb. Pulling his breathed leg up, he found a piece of his skin distended from how it should normally appear, and gaining the courage to push it down, he felt the bone underneath the skin. This is gonna hurt," Izuku muttered to himself as he pushed down as hard and fast as possible. Snap. Guh. Izuku grunted before feeling bile come up his throat. Moving over towards the grass nearby on the side of the road, Izuku threw up his lunch's contents. By the time he was finished, he fished out some mouth spray to make sure he didn't smell from the mouth. He wanted to be healthy after all. Darn it, K. Kakin. Why did you have to hurt me this bad? And now you could get in trouble if someone asks me the wrong questions. Izuku mumbled to himself as he picked up his backpack. He walked underneath the underpass with a sad expression taking over his facial features. By the time he crossed the underpass, he looked to the sky as he saw a weird-looking star flash by really quickly. It wasn't as though he was unaware of shooting stars, but at the same time he couldn't help but look up to it and state out a wish. That was a shooting star? I wish I could gain the power to become a hero. Izuku muttered before attempting to carry on. Then the manhole behind him was smacked upwards into the underpass behind Izuku. As the boy turned around to see what was going on behind himself, he saw a scene that was probably from a horror movie. A sludge creature appeared from the depths of the sewer system as it coughed up some sewage before spitting the remnants from its teeth onto the ground nearby. Its eyes were vastly larger than his own, as teeth as yellow as the sun, when it shined brightly, had shown themselves to the boy as he froze in the middle of the street. It wasn't as though he were thinking of a way to not be seen. It was his brain was freezing. Fight or flight mode had been initiated, and the boy had been so frightened by the villain's arrival that his body had subconsciously frozen in place, as though it were accepting fate. The villain then muttered to themselves as they glanced around the area, seemingly moving past his frozen frame. "DM in it. I didn't think that he would be here. I need to escape before he can find me," the villain muttered before his eyes found Izuku's. And Izuku would wish for the rest of his life that the next few moments would be forgotten in his psyche. The villain smiled down at the boy before swarming his entire sludgy mass around the boy in such a way that the boy couldn't even react to how fast the villain moved. "Nice. A medium-sized skin suit. Thanks a lot, kid." You're going to be my hero for this. It'll take at least 48 seconds before everything will go black, so don't struggle," the villain said, forcing his sewage-ridden self down the boy's throat. As Izuku did his very best in order to struggle and escape from the villain's grasp, the villain himself took note of the boy's internal injuries. He let out a gruff sound of exasperation. "Your body isn't very well kept, isn't it? Last time I had to use a body, I could fit myself all inside them. If I were to use you as a skin suit, you'd practically die from me sticking myself all up inside you. What's murder on my belt with grand theft?" The villain questioned before continuing to shove himself down Izuku's throat. Izuku couldn't think for a few more moments as he struggled as hard as he could, thinking of a way to escape from the villain's grasp. But nothing came to mind as his arms slowly began to weaken from his breath being taken away from him, sludge slowly working their way down into his lungs, preventing him from getting oxygen. As the boy's eyes began to dull and the darkness of death entered his view, the manhole behind the villain had blasted into the underpass again, this time the manhole actually staying in the roof. "Worry not, young man." "Why?" "Because I am here," a familiar-sounding voice called out. "What the? All Might, how did you get here?" the villain called out fearfully. "Because, villain, justice is never lost forever. Texas, smash!" All Might called out with a gust of wind, causing the villain to be ripped apart, dropping Izuku. The boy fell towards the ground as he glanced over at All Might one last time as his consciousness was fading out. And only one thought came to his mind. All Might. A few minutes later, Izuku woke up to the incessant smacking of his facial cheek, forcing him to wake up. Bile raised up from his stomach as the feeling of sewage being stuck in his lungs forced themselves out as the boy moved away from his idol and threw up in the nearby grass. He felt a rather large hand rubbing his back as he retched up more than enough sewage that could have made him sick to his stomach later on if it hadn't come out now. Looking up, he found his idol standing happily as he was filling a 2-liter soda bottle with the villain that he'd defeated. "All Might, W, what are you doing here?" Izuku called out as the man smiled at him. "Sorry for getting you wrapped up in my heroing lad. This guy had me chase him all over the Musutafu sewer system. It was a maze down there if you ask me. But if anything, now that the villain is caught, I must be off." All Might called out just before he turned around. However, Izuku stuck his notebook in his face. Please sign this. I need to have your autograph, sir," Izuku said as the hero chuckled. "Well, I guess I could spare a few moments for you, young man. Who do I make this out to?" All Might asked with a smile on his face. "Midoriya, Izuku," the boy replied as All Might smiled at him again. "It's always nice to meet a fan, young Midoriya. Now work HRD on your quirk to become a hero," All Might said as he watched the boy's face fall at the word quirk. "That's odd," the hero thought to himself before mentally shrugging. "I have to ask you a few questions, sir. It won't take long. I promise," Izuku said as he tugged on the man's shirt. "I must be off, young man. I need to take the villain to the police," All Might stated in a stern way. "Yes, sir. I promise it won't take more than a minute," Izuku called out as All Might thought about his next move. *, what do you wish to tell me, young man? What's so important that you have to stop me from doing my job? All Might asked, maybe a bit too harshly, but his limit was about to be reached. Minute. "I have to know. Can I become a hero, even if I don't have a quirk?" Izuku asked as he looked at the ground. "Can you tell me why you are asking me this question, young man?" All Might asked without thinking. Izuku asked, looking up to his idol. "Why are you asking me if you can become a hero?" All Might asked. Because everyone said that I couldn't become a hero like you. Without a quirk, that is," Izuku said as All Might nodded. "Tell me, what can you do against a strength-enhancing quirk user?" All Might asked rather bluntly. "I can fight them through technique, and you use my surroundings in order to find a weakness in their fighting style. It really only depends on how they utilize their strength, sir," Izuku said as All Might nodded. "Depend on how the person is utilizing their quirk, you say. How about this? What do you think you could do against a villain who could run as fast as Ingenium or fly like hawks?" All Might asked, as he stared at the boy. I wouldn't know since it's never happened before, sir. Izuku said, looking away. That is my point. You may have spirit and determination to become a hero. Hell, if I could become a hero whilst being quirkless, I'd probably be an afterthought in the Japanese heroics. But listen to me when I say this, Midoriya Shonen. Being a hero is a lot more than punching a villain into unconsciousness. You need to have the heart, mind, spirit, and power to become a hero. So to answer your question, young man, I cannot say that you can become a hero. All Might said, preparing to leave. Just as he was about to jump away, he turned his head to see the distraught expression of the boy whose dream he practically grabbed and yeeted away. The boy looked to be on the verge of tears had it not been for the blatant, confused sadness in his eyes as he spoke again. It's all right to dream, young man, but you need to know when you are just going to be in the way of other heroes. All Might stated before leaping away. Izuku stood there watching as the man who he had idolized just left him on the street. With nothing more than a signed notebook about heroes and their quirks in his hands. Said hands now trembling in sadness as he suddenly dropped the notebook on the ground with a sad huff. His eyes dulled moments later as he walked back towards the orphanage that had become his home long after the deaths of his parents. From that moment on, Izuku couldn't stare at the man he idolized in the same way he used to. He could only view the man as the person who broke his dreams and disintegrated his longing to save people. Izuku was seen walking by the underpass again, staring at the now open manhole as he stayed wary of it. By the time he passed by it, he came across a thought that entered his mind the more he thought about it. His life wasn't getting any better the longer he stayed in Japan. If anything, his life seemingly just would continue to get worse over time, and high school would just provide the same results in his life, just as Aldera had. So, taking a deep breath, he looked at his phone for the nearest plane out of the country. He really just wanted to get away from everything that was happening at the moment. Just as he was looking over random places to head to in a bid to just get away from everything, he came across a place that had a small ad for joining their religion. Tilting his head at the ad cover, he opened it up to reveal a recruitment board that was asking for more priests to join the Vatican. When he glanced at what the age level of it was, he couldn't help but see how they were asking for applicants who were around the age of 10 to join. The only thing they were required to do in order to stay within their ranks was to just believe in their religion. And as Izuku stared at the recruitment ad for a few moments longer, he gained a new goal. Join whatever this recruitment ad talked about and see what they were about. If he could become stronger through them, then he didn't care if it destroyed him mentally and turned him into an insane person. So long as he could at least make one friend that didn't treat him like garbage. He was fine with what he'd have to endure just to have a singular friend. So as he signed up for it, he received a notice that he'd be given a free plane ticket to Rome, Italy. Smiling a little, Izuku grabbed his backpack and went to make his way over towards the little orphanage that he'd called home for a majority of his life. Gathering his belongings, he prepared to leave when one of the orphanage's guides walked over to him. Seeing the backpack filled with his clothing and other supplies, they gave him a look that demanded that he give them information on what he's planning on doing. I'm moving out into a different country. I was accepted into training in another country's boot camp. Izuku informed as the guide nodded. Make sure that when you get there that you don't die. The guide said before walking away. Izuku tilted his head at that kind of action. Nobody ever told him to die explicitly, but nobody had ever told him to not die either. So to hear one of the guides tell him that specifically made him believe that she wanted him just to die alone without anyone being nearby. So letting out a sigh, he opened the door to the orphanage and walked down the sidewalk and made his way towards the airport. By the time he'd arrived there, he was greeted by one of the flight attendants who looked at him with curiosity as he showed them his little sign up for the Vatican Church. He was surprised that they actually allowed him on board one of their planes towards Italy. So as he sat down in his seat, he looked out the window as he mentally said goodbye to Musutafu, Japan. Now it was time for him to find his place in the world, one where he wouldn't be constantly kicked, beaten, and discriminated for how he had no power to protect himself. He was unaware of the fact that he was willingly joining a faction in a three-way Cold War, a faction that was part of something far bigger than the life he had currently lived, but at the same time was waiting for his arrival in Italy. By the time the plan was landing in Italy, someone waited in the Roman airport. She had short blue hair with a green fringe at the front of her head, but had the most appealing set of golden yellow eyes that showed off how serious she could really be. And as she wore her Vatican robes to greet the new recruit, she was pleasantly surprised when a young boy who had green hair and eyes walked out in front of her with what appeared to be a slight limp in his step. Tilting her head at that, she approached the boy with confusion on her expression as she spoke out to him. "Are you Midoriya Izuku?" the girl asked. The boy stared at her in confusion before a rising blush appeared on his face as the young woman waited for him to speak, until she got tired of him being quiet. "Are you Midoriya Izuku?" she asked, catching the boy off guard and getting him to nod. "I can see that you match your name. Come with me. We have a lot to talk about in the Vatican," she said before Izuku spoke to her. "What's your name?" Izuku asked, as the young woman glanced over her shoulder. "You'll find out when we get to our destination," the woman said, with a smirk on her face. Walking through the streets of Rome, Izuku took in the sights of the place as his eyes were wide with awe. The woman who was leading him towards the Vatican watched his gaze with curiosity as it appeared as though he'd never gone places outside of his country before in his life. It made her wish that she wasn't about to transform what the boy thought he knew about the world on its head in the next few hours with her superiors giving his application to join their cause a look over. It took a few hours, but the two soon arrived just outside of the Vatican's HQ, and before Izuku could thank the woman for bringing him here, he felt as though his vision was losing focus. "Sorry about that, Midoriya-san. We just need to take you in without anyone knowing. Not only that, but we need to make sure that you're not one of our enemies hiding in disguise," the woman said, as Izuku felt around the back of his neck for an itchy sensation. Finding whatever that sensation was, he placed his fingers around the item before he pulled it from his neck. Staring at it in confusion, he saw that it was a tranquilizer dart that had punctured his skin on the back of his neck, and glancing over at the woman before his vision went black, he saw her face. Blue hair with a green fringe on the front of it with the most appealing set of yellow-gold eyes staring at him indifferently. By the time Izuku collapsed to the ground unconscious, the blue-haired young woman had grabbed his head before it slammed into the ground below himself. "Griselda, was this really the right decision?" the young woman asked as she looked to her right. That was infused with holy energy, but he only viewed it as a tranquilizer dart. "He's not a devil or fallen angel in disguise. Bring him inside," Griselda said, as she helped her little sister bring Izuku's small frame inside. "He's extremely light," the smaller of the two said, with great confusion. "How light are you talking about?" Griselda asked, as the smaller of the two spoke up again. "I mean, he's extremely light, as though he hasn't been getting enough to eat every day. Try picking him up," the smaller of the two said. Griselda ignored her little sister's words before picking up the unconscious green-haired boy's body. And surprise hit her features as she immediately pulled the boy's shirt up in order to check up on his body medically, only to be met with a sad sight. Burn marks on his skin underneath the layers of clothing she'd cut through with a knife were marring the boy's skin, all before she noticed a small mark on the boy's left shoulder, just near the collarbone. It was a burn mark representing a handprint. "I don't know what he's gone through, but we need to make sure to treat carefully. We might unintentionally hurt him mentally," Griselda muttered as she looked to her younger sister. "Zenobia, get the Vatican healers. If we can heal his injuries and give him some food, he might be more willing to trust us," Griselda said, as her younger sister nodded and left. With Zenobia gone, Griselda stared at the unconscious child in front of her before picking him up in her arms. She watched as his unconscious form acted as though it were nothing more than a kitten being picked up by its mother as he curled up in her arms. It was adorable at first, but if they were going to transform him into one of the Vatican's greatest threats towards their enemies, they will need to take advantage of his slightly adorable appearance. With his scrawny but lanky frame, he was far more likely to be taken lightly in a fight due to how he doesn't appear to be all that physically strong. She had also taken the liberty of checking up the muscular growth of the boy and found that the only muscles that appeared to get regular use was his legs. Intrigued, She checked up his history from the moment he was born by taking a small piece of his BLD and putting it up into the system that the Vatican has. They collected samples from hospitals for donors who had O-type BLD, and they immediately got a match with the name he'd given Zenobia at the airport when he arrived. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk status: not applicable, quirkless. Age: 13. Parents: Midoriya Hisashi, deceased. Midoriya Inko, deceased. Griselda frowned at the information she'd gotten from the Vatican. There had to be more information about the boy laying on the ground next to her, and she would spend the next few minutes searching up any school records on the boy, only to find very bad reviews on the boy, what with his behavior being stated as being a delinquent and initiating fights between his peers and constantly complaining about how he's quirkless whilst wanting to become a hero. Seeing the word hero caused Griselda to soften her eyes a little before glancing to the unconscious child laying on the ground next to her. You don't see many people still wishing to become a hero nowadays, what with how heroism is being displayed as a job. But to see someone who actually wanted to become a hero, but having a school record stating that he was abrasive but at the same time initiating combat, greatly confused her. Seeing how the boy acted with Zenobia, he had been very cautious of his surroundings. Not only that, but it appeared as though he made her throughout the crowds of people on his way here. There was multiple times his eyes would remain on hers, as in those moments she thought he'd made her presence as she'd been following the two quietly. Thankfully, he looked away, but the way his eyes looked at every single way to escape showed her that he was more of a victim of attacks, if anything. And from how flighty he was when he arrived at the Vatican with Zenobia, she had been initially concerned, but without the real records of the boy, she couldn't know what he was like as a person without talking to him. By the time she was finished reading up on his past, she heard a few sets of feet walking in her direction and found the leader of the Vatican standing with Zenobia. I hear that you brought a new recruit who found her sight. Can I be the one to judge his character? The man asked, as he was shown to be standing in regal clothes. Yes, sir. Just be careful about your wording, Griselda said, as the man nodded. I thank you for your help, Griselda. Zenobia. I will inform you whether or not you both will have a new brother within our ranks, the man said, as he picked Izuku's surprisingly light body from the ground and walked away. I hope that he becomes one of us. I sensed great potential in him, Zenobia said, as Griselda nodded at her sister. I do as well, and I most certainly can hope to be the one to teach him the ropes, Griselda stated as the two walked away and down the hall. Izuku groaned slightly from his slumber before finding himself laying on a couch. Sitting upright, he found himself being stared at by a man in regal clothes befitting the Pope of Europe. But from what he showed on his expression, it was more of curiosity than intrigue. Good afternoon, Midoriya-san. I do hope I'm going by your Japanese way of speaking, the man said as Izuku nodded. What happened? Where am I? Izuku asked as he rubbed his head a little. Forgive Griselda for her very odd way of making sure that you were not someone to be wary of. It was her idea to pump your body a little with some holy energy just to be sure that you weren't a devil in disguise. The same for a fallen angel, the man informed as Izuku tilted his head at that. You on what? What you talking about? Izuku asked as he rubbed his ears a little. Young man, are you aware of the supernatural world? The man asked as Izuku thought about how to answer that. Do you mean about Q-quirks and how the supernatural became, well, natural? Izuku asked as the man chuckled a little. A little bit, but that isn't what I'm referring to. What I'm talking about is devils, fallen angels, and angels. Those of the Christian faith know them as creatures made by God himself who live in this world to do what they longing, the man said as Izuku shook his head. And not that I know of. Are they like the Kitsune from Legends? Izuku asked, as the man chuckled a little more. Kind of, but Kitsunes are a part of this world's supernatural presence. I'm getting ahead of myself right now. What I need to tell you is that everything you've known up until this very moment, it's about to be turned upside down, the man stated, as Izuku tilted his head again. Upside down, how? Izuku questioned. Tell me, son, have you read the Christian Bible? The man questioned again. I read it once. but that was due to not having anything else to read at the time. Izuku said, as the man nodded. Good. It's nice to see those who check out our faith just by pure curiosity. Now then, I should probably let you know that anything that you can think of in the movies that you probably have seen in horror films, they do exist, although I wouldn't say all of them exist per se, just the ones who are most well-known. The man stated as Izuku nodded. Oh, okay, Izuku said as he looked down his brain, working 100 miles an hour to get right to the point. My question for you, Midoriya, is what your dream is by joining the Vatican Church. The man questioned. I lost the dream I originally wanted. My idol told me that my dream was unattainable as I am, and that I should be realistic with what I do with my life. Izuku said, not really knowing why he's telling the man this. I see. So you're just another lost child seeking both validation as well as acceptance. The man thoughtfully spoke. And not exactly that, I want to have some kind of purpose in my life. Something that I know I can do. And flying here was more of something for me to see if I can find if my purpose is here. Izuku stated, looking at the ground, tears barely breaking the surface of his eyes. Then I see no reason to kick you to the curb, as the Americans say. Just know that with your presence in our prestigious church that you will be forced to train your body, mind, and spirit in order to become the strongest you can become. You will learn how to utilize magic, wield blades with holy power ingrained within them, and most importantly, we will deal with threats to our faction. The man spoke in a low but final tone. I promise that I'll work as hard as I can in order to become one of your best priests, or whatever you call them. Izuku said, as he bowed to the man in front of himself. The man smiled down at Izuku with nothing more than what could be a fatherly grin on his face. He then reached out to Izuku, placing his palm on the boy's head, and ruffled his hair, finding it extremely soft before he spoke again. Rise, Izuku Midoriya, and become a priest in training under the hand of God. Welcome to the supernatural world. The man spoke before flashes of people who he thought had quirks pass through his mind. A war that had gone on for thousands of years, 3 different factions vying for supremacy. How 2 gigantic dragons had gotten into the middle of said war, causing a ceasefire between the 3 opposing enemies in order to take them out, all before returning back to battle. All with it ending as the 3 remaining factions, after they had lost sight of their leaders, decided to give up their fight and return to lick their wounds. Entering a Cold War-like state between each and every single faction, where a single attack on one another could spark a repeat of the previous Great War. Izuku Midoriya, you will be under the care of Griselda Corda. She is currently training 2 underlings of her own. Do your best in order to impress her with your sure-to-be talented strength. I believe in the fact that you will work as hard as possible to catch up to your allies within the church. The man said, as Izuku looked at him. What's your name, sir? Izuku asked as the man smiled. That's for me to know, and you to find out later on. The man said, before a white light covered Izuku's view. The last thing Izuku could see was the man's perfect blue eyes staring at him in kindness. Izuku appeared outside of the room where the Pope guy was originally standing in. Shaking his head slightly, he glanced around the place before finding Griselda walking over towards him. Although he didn't know it was her exactly. Moving towards the woman, she noticed his very curious, but at the same time very confused expression as she spoke up to him in a tone belying recognition. So, young man, what's the verdict? You staying with our church or leaving? Griselda asked curiously. I was told to find a woman named Griselda. Izuku said, as the woman smiled. Well, kid, you're looking at her. Come on, let's show you around the place. Griselda stated as she walked around the place with Izuku following after her like a little duckling. She showed him where the training facilities were located around the entire church. And Griselda couldn't help but smile each time the boy's mouth went wide with how he stared at each place in awe. Letting out a quiet giggle, she couldn't wait to see how he'd react to her little sister and her friend. Hours after the sun had decided it was time to end the daylight, they finally arrived at the place where Griselda's little underlings were waiting for the 2 in pure curiosity and trepidation. Opening the door, Griselda spoke to Midoriya as he slowly caught up with her, as the woman smiled at him. Welcome to the room you'll be sharing with the girls. Make sure to not fall into lustful thoughts because that's a surefire way to get yourself kicked out of the church, Griselda said as Izuku peered into the room. As soon as he laid eyes on the two girls inside the room, his face erupted in a massive blush before he glanced around the room, finding the walls far more intriguing. The two girls in the room involved Zenovia, the girl who picked Izuku up with both her and her tan hair colored friend wearing a skin-tight catsuit that clung to their bodies, revealing their frames very easily. Griselda watched as Izuku kept his gaze away from the two girls with nothing more than a laugh before hearing her little sister speak up. Why are you bringing him here? Shouldn't he have his own room, due to his gender? Zenovia asked, as Griselda shook her head. The other rooms have either been blown up because of those training or they have been taken up. This is the only room left with available room for another bed. Just make sure that he doesn't act perverted towards you both, and you'll be fine, Griselda said, leaving the boy in the room. Have fun in there, Midoriya-san, Griselda called out, locking the door behind herself. Yeah, Izuku asked before looking at the two girls in confusion. Hello, my name is Shido Irina. Nice to meet a fellow Japanese, the tan-haired girl called out happily. She held out her hand to shake his own as Izuku stared at it in confusion before reaching a hand out himself. She shook it softly before noticing his very flighty eyes as Izuku spoke to her in a fearful tone. Hello TTU too. My name is Midoriya, Izuku. And nice to meet you, Izuku said as he bowed. Just make sure that you don't watch us in the showers or when we're changing, Zenovia stated gruffly before moving over to the bed. Oh, okay. I'm seeking I have your name now at least, Izuku asked as the young woman glared at him. My name is Zenovia Korda. Now get to bed. We'll be working hard in order to get you trained up to the level Irina and I are at, Zenovia said as Izuku nodded and moved to the empty bed in the corner of the room. Both girls got onto their own beds as they pulled the covers over themselves. And as they were falling asleep, they heard movement in the room as they glanced over their shoulders and found Izuku shoving some blankets underneath the bed and hiding underneath it as well. Confusion had entered their expressions as they glanced to one another with worry and incredulities as they stood up from the bed and made their way over to his own. Kneeling in front of it, they looked underneath the bed itself to find Izuku laying down there before speaking. So, is there a reason you're choosing to hide under the bed instead of using it? Zenovia questioned a little frustratedly. I am keeping myself out of S sight, to make S sure that I don't watch you both change, Izuku said as both girls sighed. That's not what I meant when I said those words, Midoriya. When I said those words, I meant that you shouldn't watch us when we're changing or taking a shower, because we will be doing that all together, Zenovia stated as Izuku's blush went to crimson levels. Couldn't I invade your privacy like that? It's a breach of your privacy in what is supposed to be an area where you clean yourselves. I shouldn't take a shower with you both, Izuku called out from deep under the bed. He's like a scared kitten, hiding under the bed due to the new environment, Irina said, as she used magic to pull Izuku and the blankets out from under the bed. By the time Izuku was out in front of the two, he found two pairs of large melons in front of his eyes, causing him to look away. The two girls then placed him on the bed before Irina noticed something about Izuku. Hey, why are you so light compared to normal young men around here? Irina asked, curiosity in her gaze. I don't eat a whole lot. Not because of the fact that I was forced not to, just because I'm not that hungry all the time, Izuku said, looking away as he covered himself in the blankets. The girls decided that was enough talk for the evening as they both went to bed. And as Izuku was about to slowly close his eyes, he heard a voice. The time is almost nigh. The Red One has been awakened. The weirdly familiar voice called out. Waking up the next morning, Izuku looked around his surroundings, half expecting himself to be back in the orphanage back home. But when he found both girls preparing themselves for their morning training via getting their clothes on, he immediately blushed crimson and looked away from the two. Once they were done, he got on the attire given to him for his training, as well as staring at the priest clothing that he was given by Zenovia, who stated it was from Griselda. If he were to be a priest within the Vatican, then he really needed to look the part when out on missions that they would send him out on or within the Vatican's presence. Walking through the halls behind Zenobia and Irina, the young man couldn't help but stare in awe of the place he now lived within. It wasn't as though he were scared about what his training would entail. He was more worried about how hard the trainer was going to be on him, since he was the weakest of the entirety of the church at the moment. Glancing over to his left, Izuku took note of a sword that seemingly called out to him. Its appearance had the handle and guard looking similar to that of an axe, with black and golden embroidered all around the edges of it, as well as the handle itself. And the blade itself looked as though it were three pieces of a singular blade transformed into a full blade itself. A small blue line moving along the middle of it, as Izuku felt his mind shift for a second before shaking his head and following after the two women ahead of himself. Although his gaze on the blade hadn't escaped the vision of a certain representative of the church who had given him a cursory glance before walking away. Arriving on the training grounds, Izuku found himself staring at Griselda, who wore a cloak over her skin-tight catsuit. Although, unlike most of their other colleagues, she had the hood off her head, her silver-colored hair and ocean-blue eyes shining true as she stared down at her new student. He glanced around the area before finding certain weapons that were sitting against a small rack to his left, and to his right there was a few books as she let out a cough to get his attention. "Hello, Midoriya. I hope you slept all right last night," Griselda questioned as Izuku nodded. "I did, although the dream itself was weird," Izuku said as he scrunched his face in discomfort. "Well then, you'll have to tell me about it later. Anyway, we're going to see what your knowledge on holding a weapon such as a sword is at, and we will continue from there onward with teaching you multiple forms of martial arts. But it's mostly important that you make yourself into the type of fighter you want to become, so no emulating those who you've looked up to most of your life." "Understood," Griselda informed before glancing into Izuku's green eyes. "Why, yes, ma'am," Izuku said with a determined expression. "All right, now I want you to run around the training area, and don't stop until I tell you to," Griselda stated as Izuku immediately took off. Irina and Zenobia looked at Griselda for what they were supposed to do for training, as the woman told the two just to physically battle one another, and not to go overboard, as she wants to make sure that Izuku learns how to actually fight before the two can even face him. Not only that, but she wanted to make sure that Izuku's lowered weight wasn't because of his life before coming to the Vatican, and that it was just something his body naturally had done to support his lanky frame. With Izuku running in a jogging pace, Griselda looked over at Izuku to see that he seemingly was able to continue at his pace. So she called out to him, telling him to increase his pace and make sure he keeps at that speed before she would move him onto another set of training drills. About an hour into the training, Izuku's gaze went to the two younger girls who were about his age, maybe a little older, fighting one another as they used intriguing blades. The two used blades that were shaped in the form of a katana from his homeland and a broadsword from the English medieval times. He was beginning to slow down to a stop when Griselda had landed behind him and smacked his back. He let out a loud yelp before jumping away from her as he held onto his heart, as Griselda stared at her hand for a moment, sure that she had accidentally placed her palm on an old scar. When she explained to him that they'd be moving on to a different set of training, she had him wield a blade that called out to him specifically, and as he stared at each of the sword available to him, he gravitated towards the broadsword that had appeared to be similar to that of a claymore. As he lifted the wooden weapon from the shelf, he swung it about a little bit to get used to the weight of it. Griselda smiled at him before walking over to him and standing across from him as Izuku looked at her as the woman pulled her hands out, forming two beaming weapons made of light. Izuku stared at the light as though his eyes were trying to decipher what kind of magic or quirk she had utilized to make such large weapons with ease. Griselda noticed the curious glint in Izuku's eyes before she spoke to him. "Midoriya, you might want to adopt a stance that fits your mind for that weapon," Griselda said, as Izuku flinched a little before trying out a few stances. He eventually landed on standing with the tip of the blade facing her, as he rested the blade on his left arm. His left leg was bent slightly, whilst his right leg was straightened behind him with a slight bend in the knee. Griselda took note of the form he'd been using, as she was a bit curious to see if he knew how to wield a blade from just experiencing how Zenobia and Irina were composing themselves. Griselda then spoke again. We're going to get over the basics, a little bit of sword-on-sword combat. What you want to do is do your very best in order to get your opponent to lose their weapons. But you must never let your guard down when that happens. It will spell your doom. Griselda said, as she approached Izuku. I will do what I must, Izuku said, as he prepared for her to attack, as she paused at his words. Did you just make a Star Wars reference? She asked incredulously. She watched as Izuku blushed crimson as he spoke aloud in mutters able to be heard. I just wanted to act like Keikanobi. Izuku mumbled. Kids these days. Griselda giggled to herself as she rushed the boy. Said boy immediately was on guard as the woman appeared in front of him as she swung one of her light blades in his direction. Izuku pulled back as he bent his back at a 90-degree angle before spinning around to dodge the next attack that Griselda had thrown at him with her right arm. He pulled his blade upright in order to block the next attack from Griselda as the woman twirled around him before landing on the ground behind him, as Izuku immediately let instincts work for him as he pulled his blade and had it fall behind his back. Her light blade smashed into his wooden blade as a loud clack was heard. Griselda let out a smirk of confidence as she spun around to get to Izuku's front as the boy blocked another strike at him before he jumped back again. And Griselda lost her smirk. He was just dodging and blocking her strikes, not attacking back. This wouldn't do for him. He wouldn't be able to defeat an opponent if he's never attacking back to lower their defense and stamina. Midoriya, I need you to go on the offensive. You can't be fighting defensively for the entire fight. Your opponents might be stronger than you are, so if you stay on the back foot, you won't get anything done aside for drawing out the fight. Griselda stated as she rushed the boy. As Izuku dodged and weaved as much as he could with his lithe form, he swung his blade in a wide arc out of desperation to get some breathing room. Griselda barely had to use any strength to push his weapon back, but unknown to her it garnered him the room he required to catch his breath. Unknown to either Griselda or the two who had stopped their physical training together, Izuku had been playing defense so that he could analyze Griselda's attack patterns so that he could see if he could find a way to get through her attacks. And needless to say, Izuku knew the woman was massively holding back on her strength and power. So he changed stances from how he originally had it and rushed Griselda, the woman smirking at him in response as she utilized the same moves as before with Izuku, countering them before pushing forwards. He wasn't one to attack others since he felt that it was wrong to be the aggressor in a fight PRD, as it could leave you without any kind of stamina against whoever you were fighting. He played the long game so he could find any habits within the opponent, that being Griselda in her fighting style that was suppressed, and he found all of them with his observational skills. Griselda had then watched as Izuku ducked under one of her horizontal swings as he slid under her blade. He then swung his wooden blade upwards in a slightly horizontal vertical arc as the woman dodged to the right as he pushed on her backstep. He swung the blade left and right with precision as he then tried to sweep her legs out from under her while she was distracted with his blade, but as soon as he hit her ankle with his foot, he bounced backwards, hopping on one foot. Good attacks there, kid, but you'll have to try harder than that to sweep my legs out from under me, Griselda said, rushing the boy as he bounced on one foot in pain. Her leg felt as though I were trying to kick a tree, Izuku thought to himself before ducking under his swing. The swing had cut off a small bit of his hair as he rolled around on the ground before coming up to block the two light blades as they slammed down on his wooden blade. As he held his blade in a horizontal way, it blocked the two blades that slammed onto the wooden blade given to him. And as he felt the strike vibrate through the blade itself and down his arms, he was knocked to the ground on his back as Griselda had pushed the boy all the way until he was vulnerable to another attack. She then used that moment to stab her light sword into the ground next to his head. He had moved his head at the last moment to the left in a bid to try and not get pierced through his head on the first day of training. After hearing it smash through the ground next to his head, His eyes glanced over to the right before finding a bright yellow beam of energy sitting right next to him as his entire body trembled in fear. Why you nearly killed me? Izuku called out fearfully. Trial by fear. Once you learn from that mistake you made earlier, you will make sure to get stronger to actually follow through with that leg sweep, Griselda said, forcing her blades to disappear. Good try on a leg sweep, though. Had you been stronger and far faster instead of hesitant, you might have taken me off. Guard, Griselda said, extending her hand to help him upright. Taking the hand in a very fearful and wary way, Izuku was yanked to his feet as he stumbled a little. Griselda then looked at her sister and Irina, who had stopped their fight in order to watch them, as Zenobia walked over to Izuku, causing the boy to look at her in what amounted to growing trepidation. You did well against my sister, who was going very easy on you. Even I never managed to take her on the way you did when she went easy, Zenobia said, as Irina walked up as well. That was so cool. I've never seen someone push Griselda-sensei to the point she had with you. She actually went a little harder on you than she did with me and Zenobia. Irina called out happily. You, I don't know, shouldn't that mean I have more tea to do to catch up? Izuku asked, looking between the two girls. It just shows that even though you were behind by a very vast margin, you can still grow. Not only that, but it shows that you were very observant in the fight. I didn't notice it until you attacked, but you were watching my movements, weren't you? Griselda stated before asking. Sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just waiting for the right moment to strike, Izuku said, as Griselda smiled sadly. Have a little more faith in your own attacks, Midoriya-kun, and get some more confidence. It will help you in landing hits that are hard for you to hit right now, Griselda stated. With that said and done, the small group of priestesses and priest recruit walked through the whole training regimen that Izuku was required to do. He had been tasked to swing a wooden blade over and over for the rest of the day to make him get used to the weight of it. For the remainder of the day, Izuku could be seen pushing himself to the absolute limit as he trained his body to the point of exhaustion. By the time dinner was ready for him, the young man had been seen looking at it with trepidation as he glanced between Irina and Zenobia, bringing a whole new issue to Griselda's viewpoint. It appeared as though the boy was thinking that the food in front of him didn't belong to him. Griselda had tilted her head at the boy's expression as she watched him look at both Zenobia and Irina as the two ate to their heart's content before glancing at him in confusion. The boy looked at the food he was given before he poked at it with uncertainty written on his face. He then glanced between the trio of women in front of himself again, as he then looked to Griselda, as though he were asking if it was all right to eat. That food was for you, Midoriya. I don't know why you're asking me to eat it, Griselda said, as she ate a piece of chicken drumstick. Oh, okay, Izuku replied as he began to eat. The girls didn't notice how he was slow to eat before he had merely a few bites before pushing the plate away. Confusion written on their features before he explained how he had grown to not eat a whole lot in order to keep himself going, and Griselda wasn't having it. She had to force the boy to eat the entire plate of food, or else she will punish him for training the next day, and that got the boy to scarf it down as though he were starving for years. As soon as dinner was over, Izuku found himself laying on the bed in the room given to him. Even though he was still worried about how the girls who lived in the room with him would act around him when in an enclosed space with the door shut, he kept to himself. Dinner was so delicious that he'd actually asked for seconds after being forced to eat his entire plate's worth of food twice over. And as he laid on the bed, he felt the world of dreams slowly encroaching on him before he passed out on the bed itself with his arms spread out in a wide BRTH. With his body physically and mentally asleep, Izuku couldn't help but wonder what kind of nightmare he'd have this time. And he was pleasantly surprised to find that he was sitting on a familiar side street, one that the number one hero had left him on after admonishing his dreams of becoming a hero. A stray tear fell from his eye as he thought that this dream would be exactly the same as that day. He'd met the number one hero all those weeks ago. He did everything he could in order to change the place to one where he could be free of that nightmare. But it all changed to placing himself and All Might on a rooftop at around 50 floors from the ground. If he wasn't afraid of heights before today, he'd be afraid now. But as he looked around the place for where All Might could possibly be, he found nothing standing around himself before he heard a roar from a distance. Looking in the direction of the roar, he found a massive eastern dragon that had the appearance of a western dragon flying in his general direction, causing him to fall back on his butt and stare at it in both awe and fear. Once the dragon got close enough for Izuku to stare at them in awe, it landed on the very building that Izuku now sat upon as he stared at it in fear. Its feathers fluttered from its wings before its deep ice blue eyes stared down at him as it flared its large wingspan towards him, giving him a larger frame before the gigantic dragon looked down to Izuku as it gave him a larger amount of time to get used to what in the hell was happening. Its blue-white scales gave him a very appealing look as he glanced around the area before looking back to Izuku with a smile on his face. It seems as though you have gained enough strength in one day in order to have us meet. I do hope to see what else you can show for your growth. Midoriya, Izuku the dragon, spoke as Izuku stared at it in fear. WW, what is going on? W, who are you? Izuku called out fearfully. If you must know, partner, I am known as the Heavenly Dragon Abian. I am known as the Heavenly Dragon of Supremacy. Another title is the Dividing Dragon of Divinity. Albion said, introducing himself. A, are you a Q quirk? B, because if you are T, this isn't F funny. Izuku said, as Albion just stared at him. Look at your back, and then tell me if you think I'm lying about who I am. Albion said, as Izuku felt something move out of his back. Turning his head to glance at whatever came out from his back, he found a metallic gear that had fluttered there. There was 4 pairs of feathers that were in sets of 2 on each side of the wings on his back. Izuku was slowly gaining a realization that whatever this was, it belonged to him now. Looking up at Albion in a new light, Izuku couldn't help but wonder how a dragon entered his dreams like this, unaware of how he was muttering this out loud. It's actually very simple, partner. It's because my soul has been fused with your very own, and due to that you are able to utilize my power through the use of sacred gear. It's called Divine Dividing. It allows you to take the power of your opponent by half their full power every single 10 seconds. The red one is awake. Just be aware of this. Albion said, before the world began to fade. W8. W, will I still be able to talk to you? Izuku called out as Albion just stared at Izuku. You'll be fine. Just gain enough power to become the best you that you can become. And to answer your question, I will be capable of talking to you if you continue to grow in strength over the course of this week. Albion said before everything ended. Izuku woke up from the weirdest dream of his life as he found Irina and Zenovia naked as the day they were born in front of him. His face became red before he turned his head away from the 2 naked forms of the girls as they glanced behind them to find that Izuku was awake and entered the bathroom. The 2 girls looked at one another before letting the question out. Did he see us? Zenovia asked, as Irina shrugged her shoulders. I don't really mind if he looks at me. It's not like he stares at us like most other men do. Irina said, as she put on her BR. Are you really sure that he'd actually not look at us like most men in the church? Zenovia asked curiously. I'm definitely sure. He looked at us, I know that, but he didn't have malicious intent behind his gaze. Besides, I think he's actually kind of cute the way he gets all red around us both. Irina said with a giggle. I hope you're right about that. Zenovia muttered before the 2 went to bed. Izuku didn't come out of the bathroom until really late in the evening. A week of training has passed for Izuku, as he had been forcing himself into any kind of training under Griselda. The woman had to give it to him that he was very humble when it came to the things he was capable of doing after only a week of training under his belt. Not only that, but it appeared as though the young man had been gravitating towards a holy sword far before what he was supposed to be able to do this early into his first few weeks as a priest. Currently, however, Izuku was standing in the middle of the training grounds for the church. He sat in the middle of an arena as he had his legs crossed over one another as he held his hands together on his lap, a small white and blue aura surrounding the outline of his body. A small gust of wind constantly flowed around his body as he struggled to control the magical energy that he was now capable of using, albeit a very minuscule amount. The fact he had been capable of using magic at all was confusing. To Izuku, since he had to learn everything he could on the holy element and whatever other elements he wished. The main elements of magic that Izuku focused primarily on was light, fire, earth, and wind. Those were the primary magic he was currently learning to gain full mastery over so that he could utilize them in battle at the same time of fighting with his weapon. He had long since gotten used to sword combat and had moved on to blades that were either smaller in size or weapons that didn't have a blade on the end, such as staffs and eskrima sticks. Izuku even had extended mastery over the staff department, since he wanted to at least MSTR another form of combat that wasn't with a sword. Once he had finished his meditation, he opened his eyes as a slight silver tint was seen in his emerald eyes. Looking down at his hand, he saw small sparks of green electricity moving along his hand and up his wrist before it suddenly fell away but stuck around his palm. Smiling at the small victory of getting a small amount of control over lightning magic to at least keep it around his palm, he glanced around the training area. Finding a metallic weapon on the ground, he placed his palm all around the base of it before channeling the electricity into the metallic part of the blade itself. And he wasn't surprised when the electricity had bounced across the blade itself as it created small arcs. Smiling at his newest technique, he swung the blade around in a horizontal arc before swinging upwards, releasing a small flurry of electric slashes in the air as they blasted towards the different dummy enemies that surrounded him. Watching the electric slashes he threw at each of the dummy enemies that surrounded Izuku, he walked up to each one to inspect how much damage had been dealt. There's a lot of smaller arcs of cuts on the enemy dummies' bodies as he looked back at the normal blade in his hands. This isn't enough. Izuku muttered to himself. Are you sure about that, partner? Albion asked, as a blue gem appeared in his right hand. I'm sure, Albion. If I'm going to be useful to the church, I need to be strong enough to actually be capable of fighting on my own. This isn't nearly enough power for me to utilize multiple forms of spells that I've mastered, Izuku said, with a shake of his head. Earning mastery over each and every spell known to man isn't going to happen as soon as possible. You need to take it slow and space out when you learn new spells. You've nearly mastered a new way of utilizing lightning magic, and it's only been a few hours. That big brain of yours is a big help to your training, Albion said as he let out a huff. Yeah, but I want to be able to show everyone here that even if I'm quirkless, I can still help them. Sure, learning magic isn't the same as being quirkless, but I want to show them that I can be useful to them, Izuku reinstated. Why do you think that being quirkless is causing you to be a burden on them? Albion questioned. All my life, I grew up with everyone not believing that I could be anything. I can see the looks each of the priests, and even Griselda gives me sometimes when I don't MSTR an ability as fast as they need me to. It's a look of pity, and I don't like it, Izuku said, as he clenched his fists, tears brimming to the surface. Like I said before, partner, learning everything you can right now will help you become an even better priest. As much as I hate working with the church, I still believe that you could grow stronger if you use some aura to power yourself up, Albion said, with a gruff, scolding tone. I know, but I want to become better than who I was before. I hate who I am because I am a coward, Izuku muttered as Albion sighed. If you hate yourself that much, gain some more confidence. Ask one of those girls out. Surely nothing bad can happen from it, Albion said, with a softer but still gruff tone. Can you look through my memories, Albion? Izuku questioned. Of course I can. Searching through your memories is something that is as easy as searching for a rat inside of a broken house, Albion said, a little offended. Then you should know what my past was like when it came to women. I'm not exactly the best when it comes to girls. I don't want to put my placement in the church in jeopardy, Izuku replied. It was merely a suggestion, partner. That low self-esteem will not save you from an enemy who can take advantage of it in battle, Albion warned as Izuku nodded. It's harder to get confidence due to my upbringing. It's not as though I didn't want to have low self-esteem. It was practically beaten into my body since I was 5, Izuku retorted. The two continued to argue with one another, unaware of the fact that Griselda was watching the boy from afar. She had a curious expression on her face as she stared at Izuku, seemingly muttering to himself, But what really got her attention was how he was staring at his right hand. And then she saw what was appearing on the back of Izuku's palm, the blue gem of the sacred gear that had awakened, which allowed Griselda the time to think about any sacred gears who had a blue gem, with only one coming to mind: the White Dragon Emperor. Griselda muttered to herself before a small chuckle. I guess we've got one of the heavenly dragons within our faction. It's better than having him be with the fallen angels. Griselda muttered to herself as angelic wings appeared behind her. After all, having one of the strongest sacred gears within the Longinus on our side is a good thing, right? A familiar voice said, next to Griselda. The young man who stood next to her had a very smug expression on his face. He had 10 white wings coming from behind his back with a small halo above his head as he smiled at Griselda, who merely only had 6 wings behind her back. The man next to Griselda had short blonde hair that only went to the sides of his head, but had green eyes similar to Izuku's very own, but of a lighter shade than his darker emerald. He wore a normal priest's clothing that clung to his body as though he were wearing 2 sizes over his actual size, much like Izuku, who preferred to hide his actual body build. Dulio, I didn't think that you'd come here. Wanted to see something? Griselda questioned. The higher-ups within the church are thinking that Midoriya should get one of the Excaliburs. Dulio said, with a frown. Is something wrong with that? Griselda asked. 3 of the Excaliburs were stolen last night, and we have no idea where they went. All we know is that a cadre-class fallen angel had stolen them. Dulio said, watching as Izuku re-entered his own little training regimen against shadow enemies. That's not good. Who are they attempting to send to get them? Griselda asked curiously. They already sent multiple priests and nuns in order to collect them, Dulio said, as Griselda glanced at him with confusion. What do you mean? She asked, concern written on her face. I mean, the church has already sent multiple teams of priests and nuns after the fallen cadre. But each team has either defected from the church as a result, or they were killed. Dulio stated with a grim expression. That means, Griselda muttered, they're planning on sending a smaller team that can be expendable, and those who they are sending will be wielding the remaining Excaliburs that weren't stolen or kept within the Pendragon name. Dulio grunted out before leaving, having seen everything he needed. What do you think of Midoriya's progress as a priest? Griselda asked, as the young man glanced over his shoulder. Personally, I think he's a shoe-in for the Angel faction. The only problem I see with him as a person is his low self-esteem and self-loathing, Dulio said before walking away. Turning back to watch Izuku again, she noticed how there was a white gauntlet on his right hand this time. But each time he reached out to touch something, the blue gem in it glowed brightly for a moment before nothing happened as Izuku sped up his attacks. It actually generated some wind around him as he landed on his feet before spinning around in a circle as he caused some of the earth around himself to become distended. As he panted alone in the training field, she couldn't help but chuckle. His potential as a priest is astounding, but I believe what Dulio is right. He's practically a shoe-in for the angels. Just need to work on his self-loathing and esteem issues. It's trained into him, not something he learned over the last few years of his life. I need to take a look at his past before suggesting him to join the angels. Griselda mumbled before leaving. Izuku was drinking some water a few days after the whole Griselda conversation with Dulio. Izuku didn't hear them, but it was something that he noticed out of the corner of his eyes as he trained on his own. He didn't know whether or not he was being watched at first until Albion had informed him about it, as the dragon wanted him to prove his power to the two in a way to show Dems. Izuku didn't like the wording, but he did it anyway to show the skills he's gained in only a week. It wasn't much if you asked Izuku, but it was perfect for those who had been watching. He had been watching the battle between low-class Devil Hyuta Issei and high-class Devil Riser Phoenix. The whole rating game between the two wasn't televised, but from what the leaders of Hell were talking about, it was a very close match for the high-class Devil. The simple fact that Grimoire had managed to keep a majority of her peerage without losing most of her members until the latter half of the game itself was astounding to Izuku. It showed the tactical genius that the woman had when it came to her first rating game that she'd ever played in, but Izuku noticed a few glaring flaws in her plan. The first was when she sent only Hayudu and her rook into the gym location alone. There's a lot of things that could have happened had Hayudu not been strong enough to handle Phoenix's pawns and assistance with the rook. But even after that, the servants of Rias Gremory celebrated a bit too soon, which caused the sad defeat of Rias' only rook in the raiding game as a whole. But even after all that, the next flaw was having Gremory's queen go after the enemy queen alone, especially considering the fact that Albion mentioned in his ear that Haida holds his direct opposite. The Haida boy should have been with the queen. Sure, the Knight of Rias wouldn't have lasted very long against the other group of devils that him and Haidu had gone up against in the battle. But at least Gremory would have still had a queen, or at least managed to take out the enemy queen, with Haidu actually powering up Gremory's queen enough to handle the queen alone. But he digresses. The ultimate failure as a king of her peerage was the simple fact that she allowed herself to be goaded out into fighting on a playing field where Phoenix had the upper hand. And as much as Izuku would have loved to assist the woman in getting her out of her own marriage, the young Hyuga man had managed to do so only a few days later after the game ended. He was currently thinking up strategies that he could come up with should he come across one of the Phoenix family as an enemy. It seemed as though holy energy and light-based attacks were the only things that were capable of causing Riser Phoenix any kind of damage. Essentially, Izuku would have needed to MSTR light magic, as well as other forms of magic that could directly combat his flames. He was greatly surprised when Hayudu sacrificed his arm in order to defeat the man who had clearly defeated Rias' peerage through intimidation and threats. Shaking his head, Izuku finished writing down his strategies against enemies who could instantaneously heal themselves in his notebook. Placing it away, he went to lay down in order to get some sleep when the door was opened, gaining his attention. Glancing towards the front door to the bedroom, he blushed slightly when it was shown to be Irina who had opened the door and was looking for something or someone. When she saw him looking at her, she blushed a little before entering the room and making her way over to him with a smile on her face. "Hey, Midoriya-kun, I hope you're prepared for today," Irina said, with a somewhat sad aura surrounding her. "Is that something wrong?" Izuku asked, still not used to being in a girl's room. "Well, the higher-ups within the church have spoken about giving up another Excalibur to one of us. So they need us all to gather in the hall for the last remaining Excalibur that remains inside the church right now," Irina said, as Izuku tilted his head in confusion. What happened to the other Excaliburs?" Izuku asked, as Irina visibly grimaced. "They've been stolen, and not by just any person. They were stolen by a fallen angel cadre from the Grigori, Kokobile," Irina said, with a slight tremble in her shoulders. "WL, let's not keep the higher-ups waiting, then Shida-san," Izuku said, getting up from his spot on the bed. Walking through the hallowed halls of the Vatican Church, Izuku found himself staring at all the paintings of the previous popes within the church's history. One had even appeared to be someone very similar to another person he'd known in the past for a bill he'd placed in the church for the change of their attire. He didn't know why that man was coming to mind right now, but he kept it to himself as the two arrived inside of the waiting room for the priest/exorcist within the church. As he stopped next to Irina, he glanced around the room to find multiple priests, exorcists, and many others within the church in the room. Each one held an air of smug arrogance that got on Albion's nerves deep within the depths of the sacred gear he held. Then before he could even voice his questions about what this was going to be about in terms of the Excaliburs known within the church, as Izuku already knew that two were in the capable hands of Irina and Zenobia, someone entered the room. He had an elderly appearance, with graying red hair that was a slightly salmon color as compared to the pure red it was based on. He glanced around the room as he held a small staff that had the church's symbol on the top as he gave each and every priest, exorcist, and those who were new to the church a gaze of scrutiny. All before the man's eyes fell upon Izuku's smaller form as compared to those within the place as he waved his hands to the others in the room. Once the other exorcists and priests and nuns left the room, all that was left in there was Izuku and the man who looked to be a higher-up within the church itself. "Midoriya Izuku, was it?" The man questioned as Izuku nodded. "I am him," Did I do something wrong? I swear I am sorry for whatever I did. Izuku said, with wide and fearful eyes. Huh, not to worry, young man. This is a great opportunity for you to undertake. I have received word that one of our Excalibur blades have chosen you as their new wielder. The man said after a small laugh at Izuku's expense. Oh, really? I am not that much of an E-exorcist or P-priest. Izuku said, with a lot of stuttering. It's because of your way of thinking about others that you were chosen by the blade. Remember this, Midoriya, Izuku. Good things happen to those who are not arrogant, smug, or even condescending. We have many members who live in this church who are like those words I've stated, but in order to wield Excalibur, you need to have the heart of a kind man or woman in your body. Not to mention the fact that you also need the personality to not wish ill will towards another, something that you have in spades. The man said, before pulling a blade out from behind himself. The blade was not really that long, but it appeared to be very similar to that of a katana in appearance. It was anything but a katana. It had a long blade that had a swirling bit of metal that gave it a wistful appearance. And once the blade was fully in view, Izuku noticed the gold embroidery on the hilt. When the blade was placed in front of Izuku, he felt something compel him to reach out to it, but glanced up at the man holding the weapon out to him, so he could see it. The man smiled at him as they nodded their head at him as though allowing him to grab and hold onto the blade. Wrapping his palm around the handle of the blade itself, Izuku felt the amount of power within it. His eyes briefly flashed with an odd memory from his past, the one where he lost the father figure in his life to a horrible accident. Shaking his head, he looked up at the man before questioning him. What sword is this? And who are you? Izuku asked, before his vision suddenly became hazy. Endure the mental pain of holding this blade, and it will be yours. The weapon you hold right now is Excalibur Nightmare. You will see the worst nightmare you have ever had for 15 minutes. And to answer your second question, I am St. George. I hope to see you surpass the weapon's hatred for all good dreams. The man, No George, said before Izuku fell to the ground, weapon in hand. Izuku woke up inside a large room that was very familiar. Looking around the place, he soon found out why it was very familiar to him, as it was the very apartment he used to live in as a child growing up. Before his parents died, walking around the living room and making his way over towards his mother's bedroom, he suddenly heard the sounds of fighting. Rushing over to see if they needed help, he came across a scene that he probably will never forget for the rest of his life. His mother was held against the wall as she scrambled to try and use her quirk, but it was to no avail as the man who held her against the wall itself was his very own father. The man seemingly had lost himself as rage was across his expression as he strangled Inko Midoriya as she tried her best to summon something to her hand, but nothing useful was coming. Inko then looked towards Izuku as she saw her baby boy looking at the scene with wide eyes and fear growing. She struggled that much harder to escape from her husband's grasp before managing to kick him in the stomach, causing him to fall back onto the bed and rushing over to him. The bruising on her neck was beginning to show as she hugged her child as tightly as she could before rushing towards the front door of the apartment they lived in. Slamming the door open, the two were seen rushing out the door before Inko slammed it shut behind them both. Tears fell down her face as she held her baby boy in her arms, Izuku unaware of whatever was going on. As he was currently undergoing a panic attack at how the nightmare he was currently having to endure was how his parents had been killed in front of him. Running down an alleyway that was on the way to the Bakugo family's home, they were stopped by pro-hero Slide Ngo as he noticed the two running towards him. What's wrong? The hero asked as Inko screamed at him. My husband's trying to kill me, she cried out, before Slide Ngo glanced behind her and noticed a very sinister set of orange-colored eyes in the darkened alleyway. Don't worry, I'll hold him off. You two get out of here, the pro-hero called out before running into the alleyway. As Inko and Izuku ran down the street together, they heard the sounds of a scuffle. Slide Ngo never returned after Hisashi came walking out the other end of the alleyway. The man continued to run after the two with hatred in his eyes, and Izuku finally realized why this was something he didn't remember. His mind repressed it due to how traumatic the memory as a whole was to him. His father had come home for work, the first time in years. The man had finally managed to catch up to the two as he glared at them both with nothing more than the hatred of a man who wanted to end an entire bloodline. There is no way that I could have spawned a quirkless BSDRD. We are both fourth-generation quirk users, Inko. So the only way that it happened was if you had SEC with another man. Hisashi growled out as smoke came from his mouth and nose. Hisashi, I don't know where you got it in your head that I cheated on you, but I love you dearly. I could never cheat on you. Inko called out as she held Izuku behind her. There's going to be 2 bodies in this alleyway, and I'm going to start over with a new family in the States. I don't care if I'm labeled a villain. I refuse to admit that I have a child who doesn't have a quirk. Hisashi called out angrily. The trash in the area began to lift up as Inko began to utilize her quirk, and both mother and father attacked one another. Izuku couldn't do anything but watch as his parents fought for their assured survival. Inko using the trash around her in order to gain an upper hand, with Hisashi using his quirk to turn them into cinders. The little boy could do little more than watch in horror as he glanced upwards as a large couch had been leaning out of the window. The bricks holding it were slowly coming out of place due to how old the building was, and one of the bricks fell down towards the two as Inko used her quirk to activate its trajectory and slam it into the man's face. A crunch was heard as Hisashi's nose was broken from the brick slamming into his face. Inko then rushed the man as she punched him in the face with the fury of a mother protecting her child, but her assault didn't win her the fight at all as Hisashi managed to catch her arm and slam the woman into the wall. The couch above the two shaking slightly as another brick fell from the air and slammed into Hisashi's shoulder, causing him to let out a yelp before Inko had managed to kick him in the groin and move back to catch her breath. Both stood across from one another as tears streamed down Izuku's face as he tried to speak, but couldn't. He kept looking up at the couch that was now slowly coming undone from the building above the two, before finally it fell as the two parents had gone in for another clash, both sporting BLD and broken limbs on each other's bodies before hearing Izuku let out a fearful scream. This caused both to look at him with what Izuku believed was worried and anger respectively as they found him looking upwards and followed his gaze. And moments before the couch landed, Hisashi barely managed to dodge out of the way of the furniture. But Inko wasn't as lucky as it crushed most of the bones in her body, leaving her head, neck, and hands as the only things not broken. The man got up as he stared at the broken form of his wife before looking over at Izuku as the boy stared at him in growing fear before he made his way towards his son. His wife in his eyes was definitely dead from all the BLD that splattered the ground beneath the couch, and he kneeled in front of Izuku. Don't worry, my son. Everything will be all right in a moment. You'll only feel pain for about 15 seconds before it's all over, Hisashi said, as his eyes gained an orange glow again. An orangish yellow tint came to his neck as Izuku turned around to let his back take the brunt of the flames. And as soon as Hisashi had let out his fire breath onto Izuku's back, the boy let out a scream of agony that managed to force Inko to wake up from her heavily injured and near-death state to see her husband trying to kill their son. So she did the only thing that could come to mind in that moment. She pulled everything she could within Hisashi's internal body apart, ripping them to shreds with her quirk. Izuku's screams became far louder as Hisashi continued to burn the boy's back. Once it reached the back of his neck, the man suddenly felt as though his internal organs were being torn to shreds. And turning to look at Inko, he found the woman with a broken arm extended with her hands moving back towards her in a grabbing motion as Hisashi spat up BLD before falling on his back, his internal organs being pushed up his throat and out his mouth. It was a very brutal scene as Izuku suddenly felt the pain of the flames on his back soon be met with the nice cool air of the night as he turned around, only to find the bloody sight of his dead father and his mother teetering over the edge of life and death. "And Mommy," Izuku called out as he struggled to run over to her bleeding corpse of a body. Once he got to her, Izuku felt the scene change again. Now he stood on the rooftop that held both him and All Might as he questioned the hero about becoming a quirkless hero. Hey, All Might, I have to know. Can someone without P power, can someone quirkless become a H hero like you? Izuku called out as All Might stood before him. The man gave nothing to show for his actual feelings on the matter. Can one become a hero without power? All Might said as Izuku looked up at the man. No, I should think not. It's all right to dream, young man. It's all right to dream, young man. But you need to know when you're just going to be in the way of other heroes. All Might said before jumping away. Hero, WZ. Izuku woke up inside the room that he'd been within with St. George. Looking around with a groggy expression, he looked down at the blade. Then looking around the room, he found George, who was looking at him with a smile on his face in a chair, as though he were playing chess. The man beckoned him over with an arm wave, as Izuku moved over near him with a very nervous expression on his face. Did you learn something from your worst nightmare? The man asked. I need to become S stronger to A attain W what I longing? Izuku asked as George smiled. The lesson the sword was trying to tell you was that you shouldn't rely on others' opinions of you to become what you wish. If you wish to become an exorcist, then you will do everything you can to become one. You wish to stray away from our faith, then you can do as you will. But if you wish to ascend from the mortal plane of existence, then by all means do so. Even becoming what you desired for so long, but never getting the chance to achieve it. St. George said, as Izuku looked at him with a sad expression. I don't think I can become a hero. It's not that I can't become one. It's just that nobody will believe the skills I've gained were that I earned from training. They'd think it was a Q quirk, and honestly, I think I want to stay away from the people who made my life miserable. Izuku replied as St. George nodded. You can still become a hero, you know. It doesn't have to be what those quirk users call a hero license. You could be a hero through being who you are at heart, by just helping those you believe really need it. St. George said with a smile. If I never came here, did you think I could have become a H hero without a Q quirk? Izuku asked, tears falling down his face. Oh, young man, you already are a hero. You just don't know it yet. After all, you'll be starting your journey as a hero tomorrow. St. George said with a smile. What do you mean? Izuku asked as St. George smiled again. You will be heading to Kuo Town to help recover the stolen blades of Excalibur. And your mission is to either destroy the blades to prevent their usage or bring them back to the Vatican so we can keep them safe again. St. George said as Izuku stared at him. But I can't do that, all on my own. I'd get killed. Izuku said as St. George smiled again, this time softer. You won't be alone, Midoriya. You'll be with your friends Zenovia and Irina. St. George stated with finality. By the time the elderly man had left the room, Irina had entered the room to find Izuku staring off into space. She waved a hand in front of his face before bringing him to their bedroom and sitting him down, not even mentioning how he got Excalibur Nightmare into his grasp. Zenovia had entered the room by the time they were already situated inside the bedroom within the Vatican, as Irina was shown to be questioning him, but getting nothing. Izuku, are you there? Irina asked, as Izuku looked up at her. We have T2 got to Kuo Town, Izuku said, suddenly gaining the attention of Zenovia. What? She asked. We were given the mission to recover the stolen Excaliburs, Izuku said with a dull-eyed expression. Crap baskets, Irina and Zenovia thought to themselves at the same time. Izuku gathered his belongings as the whole entire nightmare that he'd gotten from Excalibur Nightmare ran through his head. He never knew about that weird-looking dream/memory that Excalibur Nightmare had shown him. It was as though he remembered that night. And with him experiencing that entire thing all over again, he couldn't help but find himself trembling slightly at the memory of his father's orange eyes glaring down at him that night his parents died. As his hands trembled from the amount of fear that his weapon gave him, he got over it after a few minutes. Irina and Zenovia had been gathering their clothing and some money for them all to use since they both had been preparing for this eventuality. They knew that something like this would eventually happen. It was their fourth mission after all, But this would be Izuku's very first mission, and he had to gather 3 missing Excaliburs belonging to the church without getting spotted. Needless to say, when the 2 girls watched him tremble slightly in what they viewed was primal fear, they couldn't help but feel for him. His mission should have had him either helping out a small town and putting down a stray devil, but they're sending him on his first mission where he could easily die against the foe they were planning on fighting. Kokabeel, a cadre-class fallen angel who had survived the Great War between all 3 factions within the Christian pantheon. The 2 gave one another a look of worry before they watched him get over his fear. Once the trio had finally managed to gather their belongings, they had begun their journey over to the Italian airport that would take them all over to Japan. Just as they were about to leave the Vatican Church, they were approached by Griselda, who smiled at each one of them before her gaze fell upon Izuku, who immediately felt as though he were in trouble. I know that you all are about to go out on an adventure within Japan, but just know that your mission is to either work with the devils in order to bring back the Excaliburs or destroy them. But you can work alone without their expertise within Japan's borders. Also, Izuku, I think it's about time you inform the girls about your awakening. Griselda informed before looking at Izuku for the last part. Izuku flinched a little at how she had made her tone appear soft and kind, but it was filled with a stern acceptance. Are you sure that's a good idea? Izuku asked, before his sacred gear had activated on its own. Both girls and Griselda watched as a white gauntlet appeared on his right wrist and palm as it turned his left forearm into a white gauntlet-clad claw. Izuku stared down at the arm with what appeared to be trepidation before Albion announced himself to both of the exorcists who were his allies. I believe it's time that I reveal my presence anyway. It was fun whilst it lasted, but it would have been a chore to keep my presence hidden. I sense the Red One has awakened as well. In fact, he awakened far earlier than you did, partner. Albion spoke as all 3 women smiled. I had a feeling something was odd with Izuku. Zenobia said with a smile. Why, you're not mad? Izuku asked. How could we be? You've got the power of Albion, one of the most powerful dragons known in history, Irina said, looking at Izuku's slightly wary expression. I thought you both would be disappointed that I was seen to be holding back. Izuku replied as Zenobia and Irina shook their heads. Partner, they wouldn't ever hold it against you for believing that you hiding your sacred gear was to be disappointed at. In fact, I believe they'd go so far as to tell you to keep it hidden from the devils within Kuo Town. That way they won't know if you've been awakened yet. Albion said with a smug attitude. Compared to the Red One, Albion, who is the stronger of the 2? Griselda questioned. If I had to put it to the amount of times the 2 are training, I would need to see the strength of the Red One in order to make that appraisal. But if anything, from what I saw through my partner's eyes when he saw the rating game between the Grimoire and Phoenix clans, the Red One may have a slight advantage to a longer time using his powers. Albion surmised. Okay, I will send you 3 over to Kuo Town now. Make sure that if you meet up with someone that Izuku knows from Japan, to avoid them at all costs. We don't want Izuku to be completely uncomfortable in his home country. Griselda said, before Zenobia spoke up. We're not obligated to protect him? Zenobia asked, as Griselda shook her head. You won't be meeting them at the area you all are going? The only way you'd be meeting anyone from his past is if you move through the town of Musutafu, and that's on the other side of Japan. Griselda informed. Where is Kuo Town located in Japan? Izuku asked, as Griselda smiled sadly at him. It's over in the northern hemisphere of Japan, so if I had to state where it'd be located in the Kansai Prefecture, near Kyoto by a few hours. Griselda informed as Izuku nodded. With that, the trio of exorcists left for Japan, as Griselda smiled at the trio walking towards their plane. Standing next to Griselda, a man showed up with nothing more than a box of chicken in his hands as he quietly ate next to her, getting some grease stuck on his lips. Glancing over to her right, Griselda noticed how Dulio was standing next to her eating as she let out a sigh of exasperation before speaking. You know, you'd fall if you continue to let your greed of human food get to you. Griselda grumbled as Dulio giggled. How cute. You're trying to keep me from falling. I won't fall from just enjoying human food. And even if that were to happen, I'd be free to eat to my heart's content. I burn off all the calories I eat anyway, through all the training and fighting I do for the church anyway. Delio said with a shrug. What's the chances of those three returning from Japan alive? Griselda suddenly asked, causing Delio to look at her as she stood a few feet away with her back to him now. Why are you asking me this? Delio asked, confused. Just answer the DMN question. Griselda growled out, her wings flickering between black and white. Geez, the probability of those three meeting the end of their lives in Japan is at a high 75%. Delio said, as Griselda nodded, meaning that it would have been a lower amount had Izuku not been there. Griselda asked, glancing over her shoulder. Yes, their ratings of survival would have dropped dramatically to at around 15%. His presence will change the field of battle with his talent and mind to protect any and all those around himself. Delio said before walking around. Be safe, you three. I can only hope that you all are prepared for the kind of world that will be seen when you all head there. Griselda thought before an even more terrifying one presented itself. Please don't get yourselves reincarnated into a devil. The flight back to Japan was slightly worrying for Zenobia and Irina as they watched Izuku's personality slowly degrade. The fact that the young man was the wielder for the divine dividing sacred gear and was as meek and scared of almost everything was concerning for them. In their eyes, he was the greatest priest amongst them because of his seemingly limitless potential to become one of their strongest members due to his sacred gear. But to see him mentally degrade back to what he was before entering the Vatican was extremely heartbreaking. Once they landed in the Musutafu district, they all immediately called a cab in order to get to Kuo town. Once the cab brought them through the entirety of Musutafu, they watched Izuku closely as he stared out the window at the passing buildings that were moving by. The boy let out a sigh of sadness as they glanced up to see what he sighed in sadness at. And looking at the school that the entire world knew about, they couldn't help but notice the Great Wall protecting it. UA High School. In the last few days, they had been hearing about multiple attacks that the school had suffered due to villains wanting to kill All Might, even going so far as to attack a class whilst they were doing a rescue exercise. Irina, in a bid to keep Izuku from looking at the school, with a forlorn expression pulled his head away from the window. She laid his head against her shoulder before wrapping her arm around his body, where she actually felt him tremble far more than he had ever done back at the Vatican. She rubbed her hand in his hair as the boy leaned further into the young woman's shoulder before she felt tears hitting her cloak. She smiled down at him as both of the girls had one thought enter their minds in that very moment, seeing him at his lowest in terms of both his personality and mentality. We must keep him safe from that area of Japan. Once that mental decision was completed, it only took about a few hours before they all arrived on the outskirts of Kuo town. The cab was told to stop outside of the town since it was closer to the church on the hill that Irina had spoken about. She also made a mention of a young boy who was probably in high school at this point in time for his age, and how the young man had been a very close friend growing up, especially since she was a Japanese native. The trio made their way over towards the church before finding the place in ruins. Looking around the place, Izuku was the very first person to make an announcement towards the two other women with him. It seems as though this place was destroyed fairly recently. Izuku muttered, Zenobia looking in his direction when he said this. How recent do you think it was? Zenobia asked. I'd say about maybe a month or two before we arrived. Izuku said, looking at her and Irina. Do you want to explore Kuo town with us? Irina asked, looking at him with a little hope. I like to get this place set up for us. I'd rather be prepared for a potential attack from our enemies than not. Izuku said, whilst looking away. Would you like to look around the place when we return, though? Zenobia asked, as Izuku looked at them both. By that time, I should have everything prepared for our stay here. Izuku informed, as the two girls took that as a yes. With that said and done, the two left him alone to set up the place all by himself. And with the two girls left him alone as Izuku set up the church and prepare it for when they all returned back from informing the devils about a potential meeting between both sides. Izuku had hoped that he could rely on the girls to do most of the speaking whilst he tried his best to keep everything from escalating to the point that they were required to fight. For this mission it wasn't required to start a fight against the devils, but from what Izuku managed to collect in terms of information about who owned the place, he'd rather not PSS off any Satans from within the underworld. But knowing Zenobia, who took her faith very seriously in his own opinion, he knew that she might take this whole thing off course. Sighing to himself, he summoned the gauntlet that housed Albion into his right forearm as he glanced to it, before focusing on his task of clearing the place. It would give Albion the time to think about what he wanted to talk about to Izuku before they could begin their mission to search for the Excaliburs within Kuo Town. Surprisingly, though, Albion had nothing to say to him due to the fact that they all already knew about the level of danger they were all in by coming here. Albion, what's the chances of me actually winning a fight against a cadre class fallen angel? Izuku asked as Albion hummed. The probability that you'd win is near 10%. It's not 0, though, which is surprising. Albion said, as Izuku thought about his next question. If I were to only use my skills with Excalibur Nightmare. Izuku went to ask before pausing a little. I'm sorry, partner. You'd have to rely on my additional power increase in order to even stand an ant's chance of defeating that fallen cadre. Albion said, with a sad-sounding tone. It's not your fault, Albion. I shouldn't have been sitting on my butt and waiting for a quirk to magically appear. Izuku said, as a stray tear fell from his eye. None of that, partner. You were growing up during a time when having a sacred gear wasn't similar to having a quirk. But if it makes you feel better, with the level of training you undergo at the church, it's only a matter of time before you unlock your balance breaker. If not, then it'll be far sooner, due to your potential as a strategic leader. Albion said, bringing Izuku's spirit up. Thanks, Albion. Izuku said, smiling at the wall. It's my job to make sure that you're protected and kept alive. We are partners after all. Albion said, a forlorn tone. Did you want to be something more? Izuku asked, noticing how the tone sounded slightly sad. I've never had a hatchling before, so I guess my paternal instincts kicked in when you first managed to activate my Sacred Gear's power. You see, back when I was the Heavenly Dragon of Supremacy, I had never thought about having descendants of my own, but if I had wanted to have one eventually, I'd like them to have your strategic mindset. Albion spoke as Izuku felt tears falling from his eyes. Have any of the previous White Dragon Emperors ever looked at you as a father figure? Izuku asked as Albion chuckled. None of the sort. If anything, you're the very first White Dragon Emperor who has the potential to become the strongest in at least a few decades. Not only that, but you're in a unique position where you don't even have any parents that have been up to me. I would have given you a lot of my essence in order to become a dragon. Albion said, as Izuku shook his head. I would rather not become a dragon. No offense to you, Albion, but I'd rather not have an ability similar to my father. Izuku said, shuddering. I apologize for bringing up a bad memory. Did you not want to become similar to that filth you call a father? Albion asked, as Izuku nodded. Why, yeah, his fire-breathing quirk reminded me of how a dragon can breathe fire. And to be honest, it was due to his fire quirk that I had gained a slight fear of fire itself. Izuku replied, as Albion hummed. Still, though, I wouldn't have gifted you the ability of breathing fire. It would have been poisoning breath. It wouldn't be capable of being treated, however, meaning that those who try to kill you and you used it against them, it'd probably take a few days, possibly hours, before they would succumb to the poison breath. Albion said, as Izuku shuddered again. As the two continued to talk about potential ways Izuku could become stronger without having his body become more draconic than it already was due to how his sacred gear did it passively. The church was looking more and more presentable as the seats within the place had slowly become more like what a church should look like on the inside. Izuku had even used some magic that Albion taught him in order to repair both the window and the ceiling/roof of the building. Although, due to his near non-existent teachings of magic as a whole, it was just enough that water, air, and nothing aside from magic could break through it. It wasn't until it was near the end of the day that Irina and Zenobia had arrived back at the church. Turning to look at their appearances, Izuku found the two women smiling at him as he sat in front of the podium inside of the church before making their way over to him. "How was your day, Izuku?" Irina asked, as she knelt down next to him. "I was fine. I had a long talk with Albion." Izuku replied as he folded his hands together. Without saying anything more, the trio gave their prayers to heaven in order to help them with their ability to find the Excaliburs within Kuo Town. When it came time for the trio to clean themselves within the church's bathroom, Izuku sat outside of the place as he held onto their clothing. Sitting outside of the bathroom left Izuku to his thoughts about how they should talk with the devils of Kuo Town and what he can do to get their assistance in finding the Excaliburs and destroying them. Once the girls stuck out their hands from the bathroom door in order to collect their clothes, Izuku gave it to them before looking away with a small blush. As the girls had begun to change their clothes inside, Albion made a mention about keeping his presence inside Izuku a secret from the devils, so that Izuku didn't have them know about his awakening. Although Izuku had wanted to keep that secret, he just couldn't think of a moment where none of the devils wouldn't just sense it from him. So ultimately, he decided to just let them all know that he wants to just get the Excalibur blades out of the hands of those of Kokobiel's faction of fallen angels and stray exorcists. It would be hard to even hide its presence without the red one, even sensing his enemy's presence within one of the exorcists, so he decided to make sure that he'd get it out of the way as soon as he entered the clubroom for Rias Gremory. Irina had informed him about it before she took her bath with Zenobia, as much as he wanted to get that mental image to not show itself. He failed, shaking his head slightly at that thought, however. Both girls exited the bathroom, allowing him inside. Once inside, Izuku began to have his own cleansing session with the two girls going to get some sleep before beginning their meeting with the Gremory Peerage in the afternoon the next day. By the time Izuku had come out wearing his new set of clothing to help him blend in with the natives within Japan, he had actually managed to use his bank account within the city to get clothes that were normal for the trio, due to his time and working part-time jobs within Musutafu back before he joined the Vatican. The next day, the church trio had made their way over towards Kuo Academy, wearing the normal clothing that Izuku bought them. The girls had decided to ultimately wear their own church attire underneath their normal clothing, as much as they appreciated Izuku buying them clothes. They just didn't want to allow the clothes to be torn and not be capable of even hiding their modesty should their normal clothes be torn from a potential fight between both sides. Arriving at the relatively small school made for the Kuo residents, Izuku had actually made a small comment about it as soon as the trio arrived. "This place doesn't seem so bad," Izuku mumbled as Irina smiled at him. "This is where we will be getting our meeting with the Gremory Peerage," Irina said, as Zenobia nodded in agreement. "Now remember, you two, no inciting a fight, much less causing disrespect towards the Gremory Peerage. Based on what I found out, we need as much help as we can in finding the Excalibur blades," Izuku said, as Zenobia opened her mouth to speak before Izuku put a hand over her mouth. "I will not hear you complain about getting devils to assist us in finding the Excalibur blades, Zenobia. As much as I would love to say that we have a great chance of coming across those who stole the Excalibur blades, I will not allow you to state that we can do this on our own. Our success rate may be around 75%, but that is only due to me having divine dividing. Our actual chance of not getting the blades are still 25%, and our chances of defeating Kokobiel on our own without the devils are at 10%, Izuku said, as Zenobia pouted at him. "Fine, but I will not tolerate them making comments about how we do things," Zenobia said, with Izuku staring at her. The young woman watched as Izuku's face slowly morphed from a blank stare into a larger frown before the woman relented. As she slumped due to her faith being tested by Izuku, Irina and Zenobia showed him towards where the Gremory Peerage's location was. Entering the building, Izuku had a small feeling of fear build up in him that he shoved down to the lowest depths of his mind as they slowly made their way towards the room that held the entire peerage. As the two girls were about to open the door, Izuku had knocked first to allow those inside to know that he and the other two girls were present here. "Knock, knock. Whoever it is behind the door, you can come in," a feminine voice called out from the inside. Opening the door, Izuku peered into the room, causing those inside to stare at him in confusion as he opened the door to reveal himself, Zenobia and Irina, wearing normal clothing. Nothing like what they probably experienced the other day, when the girls came wearing their exorcist clothing just to meet with Sona and inform the young woman about the potential meeting between both sides. The most curious about this development was the Grimoire heir herself, as she stared at Izuku with intrigue. Izuku brought the two girls behind him over to the couch nearby as Rias sat across from him and the two girls on both sides of him, as neither side said a word. But the green-haired white dragon emperor could see the curiosity in the crimson-haired girl's eyes as she prepared to speak to him and the other exorcists. Before you question who I am and why we're wearing these clothing, I need to express something to the red dragon emperor, Izuku said, looking around the room as a young man with relatively short brown hair that had some spikes in it stepped forwards. What do you need, man? He asked with genuine curiosity. I need you to stay calm, Izuku said, before continuing after the young man nodded. I am this generation's white dragon emperor, Izuku said, as everyone aside from Zenobia and Irina jumped back in preparation for Izuku to attack at any moment. He just said to stay calm, Irina muttered, as everyone in the room sat back down with the exceptions of those who were originally standing, but still tense. That's definitely some claim. Can you show some evidence to let us know about whether your claim is true? Grimoire asked sternly. I will have you know, Grimoire, that my partner has no ill will towards you all. Albion's voice rang out. Ignore me, Albion? Another deep voice that sounded very similar to All Might called out. Izuku's eyes widened slightly at the familiar tone with a wince, causing everyone aside from Irina and Zenobia to look at him with confusion. Irina and Zenobia rubbed his back as the young man let out a sigh of sadness before shaking his head. You have no reason to join the fallen angels and stray exorcists in holding the stolen Excaliburs in your territory, correct? Izuku asked, as Grimoire shook her head. I do not. I'd rather stay neutral with something that is your problem, Grimoire said with a shake of her head. Thank goodness. That makes my question that much easier to ask, Izuku replied as Rias tilted her head at him. What is this question that you ask of us? Grimoire questioned with a fold of her legs. I would formally like to ask for your assistance in destroying the 3 stolen Excaliburs, Izuku said, as the Grimoire peerage and his 2 allies stared at him in shock. What makes you think that we're getting something out of this? Rias questioned, eyebrow raised. Zenobia, Irina and I are wanting to get the Excalibur pieces and wish to bring them back to the church. But with our chances of survival of going against the person who stole them being so low, I'm just asking for yours and your friends' help in destroying them, so we can take the broken swords back to the Vatican, Izuku said as Rias thought about it. Will it help us get some very powerful bladed weapons out of my territory that could cause a major upset in the underworld's politics? Who stole the items? Rias questioned. Kokobile, the cadre-class fallen angel. He'd gone rogue and stolen the Excaliburs rapidly, transparency and blessing in a bid to try and start a new great war between all 3 factions within the Christian pantheon, Izuku said as Rias nodded her head. That's a serious claim. How did you get this information? Rias questioned. I kind of hacked into the church's data frame, Izuku said, looking away with a blush. Each and every person inside the room stared at Izuku with what appeared to be complete surprise and shock. That was something that could get him kicked out from the Vatican had he stated he did such a thing to their faces. And he was saying it with an embarrassed expression on his face no less. I see, but why do you want our help? Rias questioned. Because the way I see it, we both get what we want. You get to get rid of some weapons that can cause serious damage to your peerage should they come across one of them. And we can take the pieces back to the Vatican in order to be kept under lock and key, Izuku said, as Rias thought about it more, adopting a thinking pose. Rias, are you seriously considering this? Grimoire's queen questioned. It's a good deal, but there has to be some kind of caveat towards accepting this deal, Rias said, as Izuku shook his head whilst raising his arms in a placating gesture. I don't want anything from you all. All I ask is for your assistance. and then we can leave with the broken sword pieces," Izuku said, as Rias and the others seemingly nodded. "Well then, I guess we could trust you, but should you all either make any moves to attack us, we will retaliate in kind," Rias said, holding a hand out. "I know, which is why Zenobia, Irina, and I will take our leave now," Izuku said, standing up as he made for the door. "Hey, you don't want to fight me, right?" the brown-haired young man called out. "No, I wouldn't want to fight you right now. I'd easily lose against you," Izuku said, as the brown-haired young man smiled. "Well, if you don't want to fight, how about we become friends?" the young man asked, holding out a hand. Izuku stared at the hand as Zenobia and Irina stared at the hand as though it were something very wrong. Although it was more of Zenobia glaring at the extended hand than anything else, but both girls heard Izuku speak something truly heartbreaking after their thoughts on that handshake had been about to happen. "I'm not sure about being a good friend. I've never had a real friend since I was 5. But so long as you are a good person, I see no reason to refuse," Izuku said, holding his own hand out. As the two shook the other's hand, something drastic happened, however. A small spark had ignited between the two's hands before their respective gauntlets had appeared on their wrists, as a loud cry from both dragons inside their gears had come out. "Why? Are you serious? What's wrong, Albion?" Izuku asked, looking at his wrist. "Yet, Dre, what's wrong?" the young man asked. "I will not work with that draconic BSDRD," Albion called out. What? What? Izuku asked, concerned. "Izuku, you are talking about becoming friendly with our fated rival. What part of that do you not understand?" "We are fated to fight one another," Albion called out. "Albion, I don't care about your rivalry with D-Drake. See, couldn't be rivals in terms of growing stronger together," Izuku called out as Albion was about to speak again before letting out a grunt. "So long as we're not working together to take down an enemy, I'm fine with you using one another to become more powerful. But I demand that we have a battle to the death at some point," Albion called out. "I'd rather not have a fight like that, Albion. You know how I am with that kind of thing," Izuku replied with a sad expression. Albion gave no sound of a reply as Izuku left the room with the girls not too far behind. Zenobia gave the blonde girl within the peerage a brief glance before heading out to chase after Izuku, and Irina was not too far behind as the two women wanted to make sure that nothing was wrong with the boy. As the trio had left, they all pointedly ignored the young man with a lighter blonde-colored hair and blue eyes looking at them with rising anger in his eyes, but relented as soon as Rias called him into the room. After the brief freak-out from Albion, Izuku had nothing to say to the Dragon Emperor, as the gigantic dragon said nothing to him afterward. The fact that Albion was that against working together with his direct opposite in terms of their power sets was confusing to Izuku, as he believed that had the two of them in the past worked together to defeat a foe who they couldn't defeat on their own, they probably had a very high probability of success of completing such a task. Zenobia and Irina followed Izuku through the streets of Kuo Town as they had slowly walked back towards the church in a bid to wait until evening to begin their search for the stolen Excaliburs. Both women stared at his back as he had been quiet the entire walk through the town, something that both concerned and worried the two, as they'd never seen him this quiet since he first joined the Vatican a few months prior. Zenobia had opened her mouth to speak to him, but not a single word could come out as she couldn't speak what was on her mind in that moment, as Irina looked at her as well. "Something the matter, Zenobia?" Irina asked, as Zenobia shook her head. "I just can't stop thinking about the face Midoriya had when Albion yelled at him like that." Midoriya had the look of expressed confusion and sadness on his face that it looked as though he were hurting mentally. Zenobia said, as both her and Irina walked quietly behind Izuku. "There's nothing we can do at the moment but be there for him. We just need to finish the mission with whatever is happening with the Excaliburs before heading back to the Vatican, and leave the devils here in this town to whatever problems arise after we leave," Irina said, as Zenobia nodded along. The walk back to the church on the hill was quiet and uneventful as Izuku was seen sitting in one of the benches. He had his head lowered, but not pointedly looking at his right arm as he sighed to himself quietly as Zenobia and Irina had moved about the place in order to search for something to do. And as the day slowly devolved into the early evening, Izuku finally stood upright from the bench as he thought about what he and the girls came here to do. They were to search for the stolen Excalibur blades before bringing them back to the church. And if they needed to, they could destroy the blades in the hands of the stray, fallen angels' grasps if they had to. By the time dusk came over the town of Kuo, Izuku and the girls headed out from the church in search of the Excalibur blades. They had decided to split up into being on their own as they traversed through the town during the night in high hopes that they'd run into the group that had stolen the blades. With Izuku, the young man had moved through the night on the rooftops as he made quick ground by moving towards the town's docks. Since Kuo was a town near the ocean, Izuku was given a large amount of the port in order to search for their enemies and those who stole the Excalibur blades. He ducked between buildings as well as when he could, sticking to the rooftops as he looked at the streets below, his face impassive as he made sure to stick to the plan of searching for the base of operations for the fallen angels who had gone rogue and working together with stray exorcists and priests. Landing on a building near a large warehouse, he took a look around the area. He stood within as he tried to sense out the magical energy of the stray exorcists and priests. Izuku kept his eyes closed as he did this before sensing a magical power heading in his direction from the sky. Looking up into the air, he found a two-winged fallen angel patrolling around the area as he hid behind a staircase heading inside the building. It flew overhead as Izuku prepared some light magic in order to create a bow and magical arrow. Infusing some of Albion's energy into it, he waited till the last second before launching the arrow. The arrow itself flew through the air swiftly. It was so fast that when the fallen angel noticed the arrow coming for them, they weren't fast enough to block the attack. With the fallen angel disappearing in a literal explosion of black feathers, Izuku moved to head away from his position, knowing full well that if there was a fallen angel patrolling the docks, that meant that whoever had stolen the blades wouldn't be too far away from their patroller's location. And running off into the distance, he never noticed how a person had climbed onto the rooftop he had originally been on, the man having a sadistic grin on his face. As Izuku moved across the buildings in his area, he came across a courtyard that wasn't too far away from the docks. He glanced around the area as he avidly searched for whoever had been here beforehand, as he'd noticed some black feathers on the ground. He knelt to the ground to take a look at them and brought them up to his nose to sniff them like a dog, thinking that he could follow their scent. But when he picked up the feather, he heard the sound of movement in the air behind him and turned around to find a stray priest with a golden blade swinging down on him. Pulling out Excalibur Nightmare, Izuku had swung his own against the enemy blade. As soon as both blades connected, a brief flash of golden energy moved by the two as Izuku immediately recognized the blade that this man used as an Excalibur. He grunted in confusion before swinging his blade, upwards tossing the man back as he landed on his feet. The sadistic smile on his face showcased the insane mentality of the man who attacked him. "Who are you? And how did you get an Excalibur blade?" Izuku called out as the man spoke. "Well, I'll be. You've got yourself an Excalibur blade as well. I can't wait to steal it from you," the man said, preparing for a frontal assault. "Who are you?" Izuku growled out. "Well, since you're about to die anyway, I might as well give the name of your killer. The name is Fried Selzen, and I am an excommunicated priest from the church. Those BSDRDS just couldn't handle my genius," Fried called out, rushing to Izuku with a swift swing of a downward move. Moving to the side to sidestep the attack, Izuku swung his blade horizontally as the man blocked the attack. The two then blurred out of existence as they moved across the courtyard as they slashed their blades at one another, with Izuku activating his holy energy and increasing the strength of his blade. Swinging it over the man's head, the man dodged through the skin of his teeth as a piece of his hair had been cut off as he let out a growl of his own. "You cut my hair? My illustrious and appealing hair. I'm gonna kill you, brat," Fried yelled, rushing Izuku. The two traded blows with one another as Izuku countered and blocked each and every attack. He sent a kick into the priest's leg that caused him to fall to a knee, with Izuku slicing his blade through the air towards the man's arm that had barely nicked him due to him dodging out of the way. Pressing his advantage, Izuku moved closer to Freed as the man constantly rolled out of the way of Izuku's attacks, only for Izuku to split himself apart into two people and rush the man. "Oh, that is such bullshit," Freed called out as he blocked an attack from two Izukus. "Do you always curse during your little battles?" Izuku questioned as the two clashed again. "I'll have you know, SHD stain, that I am very capable of having a normal conversation. But I was excommunicated due to the fact that I loved to connect to my kills," Freed said, with a very lewd expression on his face. Izuku's face went from serious to gagging as he spoke out in a very offended manner. "You literally have relations with dead people? What is wrong with you?" Izuku called out, heavily disgusted. "What can I say? I do love me a very good-looking woman, even if they're dead at my feet," Freed said as the two clashed again. Kicking the man away, Izuku retched a little before he immediately activated Excalibur Nightmare's power. The area suddenly became covered in mirages as Freed looked about the area with a little confusion and more than a little shock before glaring at the multiple Izukus appearing through the mirages. "So your power is that of illusions? I have to say that's pretty smart, but you're against someone who can see through them," Freed called out as he attacked one of the other Izuku clones. "What the?" he called out as he watched the Izuku clone disappear. "You know, I originally had thought about using Excalibur Destruction, but to hear that Excalibur Nightmare had chosen me to be its wielder, it was kind of funny." Izuku spoke with his blade raised high behind Freed. Freed rolled to the right as the blade slammed into the ground, and as he stared up to the boy, he found multiple with their own blades in the ground as well. Glancing at each and every single Izuku with scrutiny before glaring up at the Izukus who were now staring at him, each blade showing a holy energy over them. He was about to attack him when he then got a different idea about how to combat Izuku. Since he was definitely here to take back the holy weapons that his leader stole, he decided to use them to his advantage. "You know, I know where the other Excalibur blades are. If you kill me, then that means you lose any and all information about where they are located," Freed said, with a smile on his face. "You really think that I believe a word you say? After what you said you do to dead corpses after you kill them?" The Izukus asked as they surrounded him. "No, but I think you'd love to see these," Freed said, pulling his cloak away to reveal 3 blades. Izuku froze in place as he saw Excalibur's blessing rapidly and transparency were on his belt, and as his eyes widened in surprise, the man smiled even more villainously as he spoke again in a tone that belied a lot of arrogance and cockiness. "So if you wish to actually get them back, you will either have to kill me, or you will need to break the swords entirely from my belt," Freed said, with a smirk on his face. "Fine by me," Izuku said, preparing to attack. "What? Don't you want to bring the swords back without having to destroy them?" Freed called out. "I could care less about whether or not the Excalibur blades are returned or destroyed. So long as people like you don't get to keep their sweaty palms on them, I can deal with anything else that is aside from villainous people like you holding on to them," Izuku stated as he entered a combat stance. A holy energy had begun to surround Izuku's body as Freed stared at him in both shock and concern. He was about to pull out his flashbang in order to aid in his escape when he suddenly felt his power cut in half. Looking at his hand, he felt as though half of his full power was stolen from his body. And as he looked up at Izuku, he found that the holy energy surrounding himself was now larger, and the boy had a white gauntlet on his wrist. "This is your end," Freed Selzen. "I hope that you can see true retribution to all those you had killed, even if they were devils." Izuku spoke as his aura moved from around his body and into his Excalibur. The golden glow of the sword was suddenly increased dramatically as it shone brightly into the sky, and with that light was an energy that was filled with a dark green and black power that had surrounded the blade itself as Izuku spoke in his native tongue, something that Freed had noticed. "Juka no Seinaru, Ijiki, purifying whole Y strike," Izuku called out, rushing towards Freed. The speed the young man had was something that Freed had not prepared for as he tried to utilize Excalibur Rapidly's additional power to speed himself up. And as he attempted to run away from the White Dragon Emperor, he watched as the Excalibur Nightmare, surrounded by green and black energy, slowly moved towards him. He pulled his blade to take the place of his body before the energy from the blade was soon beginning to cause Excalibur Rapidly to swiftly deteriorate. So instead of using an Excalibur, he pulled out a light blade in order to tank the hit as the attack caused the surrounding area to be encompassed in a loud explosion. As the explosion was heard all around Kuo Town, those who were actively searching for the Excaliburs immediately ran over to the area. Looking in the direction of the ports of Kuo, both devil and church groups had noticed the green and black plume of smoke and debris floating in the air. It would only be a matter of time before one of the heroes from a nearby city would actually come check the place out in curiosity, so they needed to clear it out as fast as possible. Once the church women and the devils arrived at the courtyard outside of the port, they came across a peculiar sight. The smoke had cleared just enough for those who arrived to find Izuku and Freed standing in the middle of a massive crater, and Izuku had seemingly accessed an unknown level of power for his sacred gear. As two wings jutted out of his back that were mechanical in nature, but held 8 feathers that allowed him to filter out any power that was too much for his body to handle. And across from him was Freed, who had been incredibly injured to the point that a portion of his face was burnt. He was missing a left arm, and his right leg was mangled and burnt to the point that neither looked as though they'd be capable of being used ever again. The man was grunting and writhing in pain as he struggled to get up from his position on the ground, as the devils immediately made him out as someone they had run into in the past. Freed Selzen, Issei, and a few other devils called out. "Oh, hello, you little SLTS." Freed called out, his only good arm waving sarcastically. "You all know him?" Izuku asked, as he floated above Freed. "Know him? We've been attacked by him and those other stray exorcists," Grimmery stated with a glare at the down man. "Well then, it appears as though we have a common enemy," Izuku said before walking over to Freed. "I'll be taking those from you, by the way," Izuku said, pulling the blades from Freed's jacket. "Hey, you can't take those are mine," Freed called out angrily. "You weren't even using them, not to mention the fact that you're only besmirching their legendary status by using them to kill indiscriminately." Izuku retorted by bringing all the blades to himself. "Hey, all those I killed weren't showing their love to God or have been colluding with devils," Freed called out from where he was. "Just because humans collude with devils doesn't mean that they don't respect God. They just are asking devils for a wish that God himself won't willingly take for granted," Izuku replied as he summoned a box for the Excalibur blades. "Are you all right, Midoriya-kun?" Zenovia asked, concerned at Izuku's new development. "I'm fine, just a little tired is all," Izuku said, rolling his right shoulder. "Well, that's all the blades we came here for," Irina said with a smile. "I'll have you all know that this isn't where this fight ends," a voice called out, drawing everyone's attention. Looking on top of a nearby building that had a dome for a roof, a man stood wearing an archbishop's attire. Izuku noticed how the man appeared to be both smarmy and arrogant when it came to their presence on the battlefield, as he'd placed himself in a position of power. He was attempting to intimidate them all into doing as he said, and from what he was sensing from him in terms of magical energy, the man wasn't even that strong. "Valper Galilei," Zenovia growled out, pulling out Excalibur Destruction. Irina did the same as she pulled out Mimic, and Izuku readying Excalibur Nightmare. "It's so nice to know that I've gained the attention of those who are under no circumstances in a position to fight me. After all, your precious blades are not with your possession anymore." "The man," Valper said with a smile. Looking at his feet, Izuku noticed how the box of blades he'd taken from Freed were indeed gone. Looking around for whoever could have stolen them in the time that they were all distracted with him, he found a fallen angel with 10 wings from his back floating near Valper. But from the appearance alone, the man held a lot more magical power and presence than that of the Archbishop himself. And Izuku couldn't help but feel a building fear as the pointed-eared fallen angel smirked in their direction as the swords floated around Valper. As much as it pains me to see my stray dog be killed like he has, I must get going. I have my own little plan to get finished. The fallen angel said, before preparing to leave. Who are you? Izuku called out, creating a fissure of air displacement with Excalibur Nightmare in the direction of the fallen angel. Said fallen angel had merely used 2 of his wings to swat the attack away as though it were nothing. The girls and the devils stared at the fallen in shock before the fallen angel appeared in front of Izuku with no time to block an incoming strike. The palm of the man stopped just a few inches away from his face as a powerful ball of light formed in his hand, as half the man's face was shone with the lighting. Crimson-red eyes glared down at Izuku with a sadistic grin on his face as he spoke. Boy, you just attacked a cadre of the fallen angels. So be prepared to tank an attack of that caliber, the man said, as Izuku was covered entirely in a beam of light. Jaiya! Izuku screamed in agony as he was blasted through nearby trees and off into the distance. In the blast, he dropped Excalibur Nightmare in the process as his status of being around was now up in the air. The devils, Zenobia, and Irina stared at the area where Izuku had once been with fear and shock on their faces, as the White Dragon Emperor had been incapable of even holding a candle to the man in front of them. Said man looked at each and every one of them as he smiled with nothing more than a malicious grin before telling them who he was. The name is Kokobeel of the Fallen Angels, and I do hope our battle later on today will be what brings me joy. After all, I've been around since the Great War. The Fallen said before taking off with Valper. Izuku felt as though his entire body was burning from the amount of power that surrounded his form, letting out a grunt of effort. And with the assistance of Albion giving him a higher durability, he fell out of the long beam of light energy that had blasted around him. Although he still smashed through multiple trees and was flung far away from the others, making him greatly wonder if they were still alive even after his brash actions against the cadre class being. He finally stopped being crashed through trees as he smacked the last one that stopped his speed immediately. He'd felt pain similar to this in the past many times, but it had never gotten to the point that he felt as though a broken spine could erupt from it. Laying on the ground in pain, he groaned to himself as he struggled to get back to his feet in order to look around the area he was laying in. But he managed to get into a standing position as he took in the forest where he stood in as he panted heavily from the damage he'd taken. It was a bad idea to attack Kokobeel like that, partner. Albion finally said, after a day of nothing, why do you hate the thought of working together with your rival? Izuku asked as he leaned against a tree. For the longest time in history, all I remember us doing is fighting one another. He wanted to prove his strength and power, that he was fit to be as strong as me, to be my equal in all power, strength, breathing capabilities, and more. All I had wanted to do was enjoy my time as one of the most powerful beings in the known world, and he came in searching for an opponent who could counter him. And I guess I found that rival I'd longed for in my youth before meeting Drake. Albion said, a wistful tone in his voice. You know that you both can work together in order to increase the power you both wielded by training together, right? Izuku asked as Albion scoffed. Drake was not one to work with me to increase our gains, and for that I am thankful. I'd always lorded myself as one who got powerful through my own methods of training, and with how strong you've managed to come in only a few months, you're already nearing your balance breaker. Albion said as Izuku froze. There's no way that I'm strong enough to wield balance breaker already. Izuku spoke, disbelief in his tone. You might not see yourself as powerful, young man, but I can see it. You've already grown far stronger than the Red One, and you've actively been training yourself through hard work and determination. Albion said, as Izuku could imagine Albion appearing next to him as a vestige/ghost. There can't be any way that I'm as strong as I am. I lost easily to Kokobeel. How strong is my B balance breaker? Izuku asked as Albion smirked. Drake may not like my balance breaker, but you would. My Sacred Gear's balance breaker would make you infinitely more powerful than that DMN Crow. Not only that, but any energy used from the divine dividing that is lost through any of your attacks can be regained by taking the energy of that crow. Albion boasted as Izuku thought about it. Is there any way I can take energy away from Kokobile without having to touch him? Izuku questioned as Albion hummed. There's a way, but you'd still need to land at least one hit on him. And you've lost your blade, which could have been a catalyst. Albion stated as Izuku thought about it. See, couldn't I just make a blade of light? Izuku asked, as Albion smirked from within the sacred gear. So long as you know how to make one, then that should do just fine. Albion spoke with a knowing tone. Okay, so I don't really need to hit him with my skin and bone, just nick him slightly with my blade of light. Izuku muttered to himself as he formed a blade of light from his palms. Yes, that's it. And just a little word of warning. You can only use the move once, as it will be very taxing on your body as of right now, so only use it when you have the chance. Albion warned. I'll do my best, Albion. By the way, do you know where Kokobile was planning on attacking the devils at? Izuku asked as Albion chuckled. I'm sure that you can come up with an idea. Albion retorted with a snort. He's going to attack Kuo Academy, isn't he? Izuku asked, rubbing his temples. You said it, not me. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get some sleep. Your mind is as crazy as possible sometimes. Just project some confidence onto yourself, and you'll be fine. You are current White Dragon Emperor. I'd prefer if you had some kind of confidence in your own strength. Albion said, before the blue light of the gem on Izuku's right hand slowly dimmed. Thanks for the encouragement. Izuku muttered before summoning divine dividing swings. He took off with a shockwave of air that blasted out from all sides of him, rustling some of the trees around him. Izuku also didn't notice the very feral and smirking expression of a certain bunny watching him from a forest. As Izuku was running through the streets of Kuo town, he had been keeping an eye out for any undesirables within the town. He had been searching for Kokobile and those who he had allied himself with throughout the night before he noticed a large barrier appearing in the location near the school, if Izuku could remember correctly. Increasing his pace, he was nearing the school when something landed in front of him, forcing the young man to slide to a stop as the smoke covered the individual who had appeared. Looking into the smoke, Izuku couldn't get a view of whoever had just arrived in the location. He strained his eyes to even get a good look at the individual inside the smoke before he noticed a pair of gauntlets slowly revealing themselves from the dust and smoke. As hard as he could, Izuku managed to see a set of red eyes glaring over at him with nothing more than malicious intent in the person's gaze as he entered a combat stance of his own. But for some reason, Izuku couldn't help but feel as though the gaze that's on him was from someone he knew. And as soon as the smoke and debris cleared up for him to see who was standing in front of himself, he found a familiar expression of rage-fueled hatred. Something in the back of his mind immediately connected the dots to whoever was standing in front of him as the young man who had done nothing but make his life a living hell. Kakin. Izuku grunted out as the young man began to smile. I'm here to take you home, Deku. The familiar toned voice of Kakin growled out. You're not a hero right now, Kakin. Izuku retorted as Katsuki smirked at him even more. I am a provisional hero right now. And where the hell have you been in the last 5 months? Deku. Katsuki growled, neither making a single move. That's none of your business, Kakin. I don't have the time to deal with you right now. Izuku growled back. Izuku was currently unaware of how Albion had noticed the building fear in his heart that was telling the boy to run away and replaced it with growing rage. Yes, the heavenly dragon had seen the memories of the boy and how this young man in front of him was the main cause for his partner's misery. So in a way to make him far more volatile, he increased the boy's receptors to fury and hatred to the point that Midoriya would be prepared for a fight as his legs locked into a combat stance. The boy across from Izuku took note of the feral stance Izuku was taking part in. Not to mention how the boy's eyes were slowly becoming pinpricks at the mere sight of him before the young man activated his quirk in a way to cow the boy's budding rage. But even that didn't seem to fall back into fear, as the boy in front of him had seemingly changed and grown a spine from the last time they'd seen one another. Well then, if you're not going to come back home willingly, then I guess I'll have to force you, Bakugo said, entering a combat stance. I have better things to do right now than fight you Kakin. Izuku growled angrily. What are those things that are better than what is happening right now? Katsuki questioned angrily. Are you looking down on me once again? Katsuki practically yelled. I don't have time for this. Get out of the way. Izuku yelled, rushing the young man. I won't leave until I bring you back into Musutafu. Katsuki screamed back. The two ran towards one another as the other utilized their quirk to fly over to him with a right arm pulled back. Izuku pulled his own right arm backwards in preparation to counter with the pure strength he'd gotten from training under Griselda as both fists flashed towards one another. As soon as Katsuki's fist slammed into Izuku's very own, an explosion erupted just at the same time of something cracking in the air. An explosion burst out from Katsuki's fist as he heard a crack that seemed to be from Deku, but when he was thrown away, he couldn't believe it. Bouncing off the ground, he landed on his feet before pulling his hand in front of his left and started to shoot small blasts of concentrated nitroglycerin sweat that hadn't been ignited towards the green-haired boy. The young man dodging and weaving through each and every attack before he reached Katsuki with nothing more than evident fear and anger in his expression as he pulled a leg back out to smash right into his head. Ducking under the attack, he raised a palm upwards and blasted him with his quirk, which seemed to do nothing. Izuku then landed in front of him, grabbing his extended right arm and lifted him over the boy's shoulder and slamming him into the ground using a judo throw. When the air left Katsuki's mouth, he let out a cough before he felt a palm on his chest as some kind of energy pierced through his left pectoral and through his back. Coughing up BLD, Katsuki kicked at Izuku, who had leapt away from him as the ash-blonde boy had slowly got up to his feet. He checked his injury and noticed how there was a hole in his left pectoral, but it didn't seem to pierce through his entire body. He was just glad that the boy across from him didn't even try to kill him outright by using that attack on his heart. He now saw how dangerous this young man was. At least that was what his instincts told him, but his brain was trying to wrap his mind around whatever Deku had just done to him as he'd been born quirkless. So how was he able to hurt him like this? How long have you had a quirk, Deku? Katsuki growled, his quirk activating. I don't have a quirk. That was the result of harsh training. Izuku replied as he adopted a fighting stance. Don't F with me? What you just used had to be a quirk. Katsuki growled before pausing. Unless you got that power from that F-er at Kamino War a month and a half ago. Katsuki grunted out as he burned the hole on his chest closed. W, what the heck are you talking about? Izuku called out, confused greatly. Admit it, you got a core from that BSDRD at Kamino War a month and a half ago, and now you're working with that all for one F-er. Katsuki yelled as Izuku just stared at him in disbelief. Who the heck is all for one? Izuku called out confused. Don't deny that you're not working for him. I know that you've been starved for having a quirk since we were kids. Katsuki yelled. I don't have the time for this. I didn't want to do this to you. But you left me no choice. Izuku muttered as he rose a palm. Katsuki prepared for another one of those weird piercing attacks when he heard Deku mutter something under his breath. Divide. Izuku mumbled. Almost immediately, Katsuki felt as though his strength was sapped by at least half. Confused, he tried to activate his quirk and noticed how weak it was compared to at first before he found a foot coming toward his face and attempted to dodge, but found that he was incapable of moving out of the way in time as the boot slammed into his face, knocking him to the ground before Izuku placed his palm was placed on Katsuki's chest again. The boy struggled beneath Izuku as the young man gave him a hurt but very sad expression as he continued. Divide. Izuku spoke in a tone that Katsuki heard again. Do not you dare. Fight me, you coward. Katsuki grunted before attempting to punch Izuku in the face and activate his quirk. When the damage dealt to Izuku wasn't done in a way that could hurt, he felt even more of his strength and stamina sapped away. Katsuki could feel as though his mind was falling into darkness as dark spots clouded his vision as he growled at Izuku, sending a kick at the boy's back, which had been blocked by a weird construct on the boy's back. I've wasted enough time trying to get you to leave me alone. I don't want to go back there. There's nothing for me there. I'm sorry, Kakin, but you need to stop trying to prove to me that you're stronger. You can achieve your dream of becoming a hero through UA. I'd rather not go there where your personality could make mine take a nosedive from where it's at. I'm accepted where I am. Can't you accept that? Izuku said as he stared at Katsuki's eyes. What about the old man and hag? What about their feelings? Huh? Katsuki grunted as Izuku stood upright, placing his boot on Katsuki's chest. Tell them that I'm sorry, and that I really like where I'm at currently, Izuku said as he registered how it had been raining. Divide. Izuku mumbled as Katsuki let out a breath of air before passing out on the ground. You let him down through humiliation. Do you really think that he'll leave you alone? Albion questioned. It's the only way to get him to see the difference in our dreams. He can achieve the dream he'd always wanted while leaving me in the dust, just as he wished. I've let him drag me down in the dumps far longer than I should have. I just don't want to go back where my personality can make a nosedive from where I'm at. Izuku replied as Albion hummed. Well, at least you're staying with those who actually care for you. The boy mentioned his parents through his very unorthodox way of speaking. Have you lost love for them as well? Albion questioned. It seemed as though the rain increased in its intensity as Izuku stared at the boy on the ground behind himself. Looking ahead of himself with a pained but sad expression, he shook his head and walked away from the boy. I haven't lost my love for Mitsuki and Masaru. I loved them as they were my aunt and uncle growing up, but they never even tried to adopt me in the last few years that I've known them. I don't want to burden them with my presence anymore. As far as I'm aware, I'd be fine if they thought I was dead, Izuku said before moving towards the barrier in the distance. Well then, I approve you of utilizing power far beyond what you are capable of. But remember, you can only have 1 minute in order to defeat Kokobile. That is all you can get before you gain that power for yourself on your own. Albion stated, as Izuku looked to his right hand. Clenching his fists, he glared at the barrier protecting the school from the rainstorm. Taking a deep breath, his hair falling down to stick to his head, Izuku rushed over towards the direction of the barrier surrounding Kuo Academy and taking flight to appear high above the barrier itself. When he got near, Izuku looked at who was holding the barrier up in the air and preventing the people inside from leaving. He took another deep breath as he prepared for any backlash that activating his full power would bring. Here goes nothing. Are you ready, Albion? Izuku questioned as Albion let out a snort. Just say the words already, partner, Albion said, with a knowing smile from within the divine dividing. Izuku's body became encased in a large white light as he uttered 2 words blinding those inside the barrier and outside, holding it up. Balance break. Izuku mumbled. Rias Gremory was one who had never underestimated the power of one who had survived the Great War between the 3 factions. But as of right now, she couldn't help but feel as though something was wrong with the fight her peerage and those exorcist nuns present against Kokobile. The man had been sitting on his throne for the past 10 minutes since they'd initiated their fight with one another as he'd sent out Cerberus the Hellhound, who protected the underworld from those who entered without permission. How the cadre-class fallen angel managed to grab the animal from their post astounded her. But that was nothing in comparison to the fact that Valper Galilei had stated about how Kiba's very own allies having been killed for the whole reason that it was a failed experiment. Not only that, but he used the pieces of the lost children's souls in order to help those who weren't a part of the experiment, that heaven started wielding holy blades that weren't previously capable of doing so on their own. It brought her back to the 2 women who had been fighting for their lives with them. They had not only lost a very useful ally in Midoriya, Izuku, something she was really hoping to get on her side through an evil piece, but the way he'd attacked Kokobile brashly confused her. The fallen angel hadn't really done anything wrong to the boy to act rashly like he had, and that was what confused her even more. He had attacked a fallen angel who was retreating towards her school without provocation. He could have been here at the moment to assist in their fight had he just stayed calm, but for some reason he had wanted nothing more than to attack the fallen angel with their back, turned only for it to fail, leaving them 1 man down. A few minutes had passed since the summoning for Cerberus, and they all had managed to defeat each and every copy of the creature who protected Hell from outsiders. And Issei had managed to collect enough power to empower both her and Akino in their bid to take down Kokobile with their own gathered strength. It wasn't even enough for them to utilize and in the might of Kokobile as he merely toyed with them. Then came the revelation that her queen was the daughter of Barakil III in command of the Grigori, something that she'd be talking to her queen at a later date about. Not long after, that came the revelation from Galilei about how Kiba's friends were used in the creation of the crystals, allowing the church to have so many holy blade wielders within their ranks, which then caused Kiba to activate his very own balance breaker once he achieved a high level of emotions rushing through his body. Kiba used the newfound power with his balance breaker sword called the Sword of Betrayer. It held the magical energies of both holy and demonic power in two sides of the blade itself, as he wielded it with great efficiency, managing to actually allow her to see the new weapon that Zenobia had held within herself as well. Apparently, it wasn't Excalibur destruction she could wield as well. She was basically the current wielder of Duran-Alla weapon that was nearly as powerful, if not more so, than Excalibur in its true form. The two managed to destroy the nearly completed Excalibur on their own before killing Valper Galilei. Once that was done, it was down to Kokobile, who had smiled down at them before attacking them all at once. And to say that he wasn't holding back was not a very good rendition of how he fought them. His power, strength, speed, and many more was so advanced and higher than their own, they were practically running around like they were headless chickens. Even with them all teaming up in order to take down Kokobile at the same time, Kiba was only capable of getting a small scratch on the fallen angel, and that caused him to immediately increase the amount of power he was utilizing against them all, with each and every single one of them being put out of commission instantly. They were all on their last legs, as all that remained of their fighting force who were actually awake was herself, Akino, Zenobia, Kiba, barely, and Issei by sheer force of will. You know, since you all are going to die soon, I might as well inform you all about what happened with the previous leaders during the Great War. Kokobile said, with a very happy expression. What are you talking about? The leaders of Hell were killed in the Great War. We already know that. Rias growled as Kokobile smirked at her. Well, that is true, but it wasn't stated about Heaven's losses as well. Kokobile said with a knowing smile. What are you talking about? Why are you talking about Heaven right now? Zenobia growled, holding her blade. Tensions were already high before, but hearing about Kokobile speaking about Heaven in that manner caused Zenobia to let out a growl of frustration and anger. What I'm talking about is that I know what happened to God himself, Kokobile said, as Rias tilted her head. Isn't he still in heaven dealing with everything up there? Rias questioned. Oh, Michael has been doing a great job up there, but God is no longer with us, as he'd been killed in the Great War, and by my own hands no less. Kokobile called out, spreading his 10 dark wings with nothing more than a sadistic, sneering smile on his face. I am possible. There's no way God's dead. Zenobia called out, her hands trembling. She's right. God is all-powerful. There's no way he could have been killed. Rias called out to him, looking hopeful. I would show you the evidence. But his form disappeared as soon as I pierced through his chest with a blade of light created by my own hands. But I wouldn't expect you to understand, after all. Michael has been doing his best to keep those believing in God. Kokobile said, offhandedly. Why are you talking about how Michael is in charge of everything? There's no way God's dead. Zenobia screamed at him. It's true. I don't understand how you all just don't get it already. God has been dead all this time. Why do you think there hasn't been any miracles happening across the world? After all, it only stopped after quirks became a thing. Kokobile said, with a very disgusting grin. Quirks? Why are you talking about that now, of all times? That has nothing to do with why God is not in charge of heaven. Rias growled. Ah, I see he hasn't informed everyone before his demise. The reason why quirks are a thing nowadays is because they were the very last miracle he gave to the pitiful humans of this world. The reason why some of your servants, Rias Gremory, are even capable of holding quirks is because God had made it so as his final decree before he died in my hand. Kokobile grunted out before walking towards them. Moving closer to the group, none of them were staring at him specifically except for Zenobia. Her thoughts went back to Izuku as the young man had entered her and Irina's life without any quirk to his name, only the sacred gear of divine dividing. So that brought a new question to her mind. If God gave the miracle of giving quirks to those around the earth, why didn't he give quirks to 20% of the human population? Zenobia asked, her eyes bloodshot from rage. Her entire body had been trembling with both rage as well as sadness as she stared at Kokobile as he constantly laughed in their faces. I have no idea as to why 20% of the world population was born without a quirk. But I do know one thing. Those who are born without a quirk, they're either destined for horrifying lives in general, or they were given something far greater than any kind of quirk. They were gifted with a power of their own. They just haven't found it yet. Kokobile stated, as Rias muttered under her breath. Sacred G gears. Rias muttered to herself, before glancing at Issei. Issei, what is your quirk? Rias called out, as the young man looked at her. My quirk? It allows me to essentially stick to any surface with any part of my body. Why are you asking me this? Issei asked, as Rias looked over at Kokobile. Kokobile, what are those powers in humans without a quirk? Rias questioned. Obviously, they're the sacred gears. Those without the power of quirks cannot get a sacred gear. Kokobile grunted out before preparing a final assault. Then why does my pawn have a quirk? Rias questioned, as Zenobia looked at Issei. You have a quirk? She questioned as Issei nodded. I never stated that it was impossible to get a quirk after getting a sacred gear. All I said is that you cannot have a sacred gear with an already existing quirk within your body that's been manifested. Kokobile informed before summoning a light spear in his hand. With that knowledge out and about, Kokobile was preparing to throw his light spear over at the group. Just as he was about to throw it, the barriers surrounding them all had broken apart as though it was crashed through via pure force and strength. A bright light covered their vision as Kokobile looked up at whoever was making their appearance to them all as white and blue wings slowly fell from the sky, revealing an armored individual. So I guess you survived my attack after all. Kokobile surmised with a smirk. It's time that you end this farce, Kokobile. Albion's voice called out. The two then flew towards one another with their fists extended towards one another. And from what everyone could see, a clash of powers were revealed to them all as a shockwave of their power blasted those around away from them both. Izuku, bearing his balance breaker, fell from the sky, garnering the attention of everyone present on the battlefield. Kokobile looked up at Izuku as he slowly floated down to the ground in front of all the others. He took a deep breath as he prepared himself for a fight. The fallen angel merely glared at Izuku as he stood across from him, the wind in the air, causing the feathers on his wings to flutter with it as he spoke. You've returned. I didn't think that you were strong enough to survive that. I guess I was wrong, Kokobile said as he smiled. I'm strong enough to survive anything. You underestimated my defensive capabilities. Izuku retorted. Izuku. Zenovia's voice rang out, causing the boy to look at her. Hey, I'm back, and don't worry, everything will be fine, Izuku said, looking back to Kokobile, who was giving him a grin. Why? Because I am here, Izuku said, before rushing Kokobile. The two flew towards one another as they pulled back their arms for a massive punch directed at the other. As soon as their fists collided, a ripple effect in the air had moved about the air around the two, Kokobile's long black hair flowing with the wind, as Izuku then spun around him and kicked him in the back. Kokobile fell from the sky and into the ground as Izuku slammed his feet into his chest, that the fallen angel had blocked with his arms but felt his body crater in the ground. He slapped Izuku away with his wings as the balance breaker wielder had been blasted into the sky. Kokobile had been following after him with his arms pulled out to the sides, creating multiple light spears with a manic expression on his face. Just as he was about to move them over at him, Izuku smirked from behind his helmet. Then moments later, Izuku thrusted his palm out, the gems glowing ominously as Kokobile realized his folly. Divide! Izuku called out, as Kokobeel's light spears suddenly shrank in size and power. Then Kokobeel arrived at Izuku and went to move the spears at the boy who dodged out of the way. The two danced across the sky as they countered one another. And after being hit once, Kokobeel knew he needed to end the fight as soon as possible before he heard Izuku call out divide again, not even 10 seconds later. With another half of his power taken, Kokobeel noticed his speed decreasing by a very wide margin. But he kept up with the fight as Izuku and him flew through the sky, hitting one another with powerful strikes and magic. Izuku then flew towards Kokobeel with nothing more than his fists alone. The fallen angel flying past Izuku as the young man had turned around to fly up towards Kokobeel whilst his power had been halved again. Flying after the fallen cadre, Izuku kicked the fallen in the stomach that he'd managed to barely block, but grabbed Izuku's wrist gauntlet and squeezed as hard as he could, breaking the piece of armor completely. Izuku was then flung towards the ground at a fast pace as he crashed into the dirt. Climbing out of the dirt, whilst wiping away some of the scuffs and other debris from his body, Kokobeel landed not too far away. The fallen cadre then smiled at Izuku before rolling his shoulders as he spoke to the young White Dragon Emperor. "It's been thousands of years since I've been pushed this far, and I haven't had my power halved in about another 100 years. It feels so good to lose some of my overwhelming power." Kokobeel boasted. "So what? What's it got to do with the amount of power you have?" Izuku questioned, entering a combat stance. "It's got everything to do with this fight, but it matters not to me. All you should know is that you should count yourself lucky," Kokobeel said, as the two rushed one another again. As the two fought off in the distance, landing significant blows against one another, Zenovia and Kiba stood next to one another. They were greatly considering the problem with Izuku fighting against Kokobeel all by himself, but the fact he was able to utilize his balance breaker this early was surprising even to them. From what they both know, Izuku manifested his sacred gear when training at the church not even a month and a half ago, so the fact he went from being incapable of using its full power to this is concerning to them. Issei had his sacred gear unlocked for around at least 6 months, and even he hasn't reached this level of power. Zenovia then realizes something. He is fighting at full power, yes, but he's stopped having Kokobeel's power. Zenovia stated, catching Kiba, Rias, and Issei's attention. "What do you mean?" Kiba asked, confused. "Izuku's stopped having Kokobeel's power ever since a few seconds ago," Zenovia stated with concern in her features. "What we should be more concerned about is whether or not Izuku knows about God's apparent death," Rias said with a serious attitude. "I'm not so sure about that," Kaneko said, as she stared at the two great powers in the air. "What are you getting at, Kaneko?" Kiba questioned. "Midoriya, his power, it's weakening. I'm not sure how much longer he can fight right now," Kaneko explained as the others winced at that. "I've been collecting power for the last minute and a half. Would that get him back to full power?" Issei asked, walking over. "I'm not sure if he'd be capable of taking your power right now, Haidu. If the interaction between both dragons back at our meeting a couple days ago were anything to recount, they would really not appreciate you giving power to your mortal enemy," Zenovia stated as she stared at the battle with more concern, her sword trembling in her grasp. "Then what can we do?" Issei asked, not wanting to be relegated to the sidelines. "We need to make an opening for him, so he can use a move. I think that's what he's waiting for," Zenovia called out before rushing into the fight. She was flanked by Kiba and Kaneko as the two were on her opposing sides, left and right. By the time they returned into the fight, Izuku had managed to grab onto 2 of Kokobeel's wings and tore them from the fallen's back. Both her and Kiba jumped into the air as Kokobeel let out a furious wail of agony before they landed strikes of their own, allowing Izuku to fall back and increase his power just high enough that he wouldn't lose any more. He was panting heavily at this point. Some scuffs on his armor and his helmet protecting his face had long since been broken off, BLD falling from his nose and the top of his head as he gathered his breath. "Let's do it, Albion," Izuku muttered as Albion let out a ferocious growl worthy of a dragon emperor. "I am with you all the way, partner," Albion called out, as Izuku pushed his left arm outward. "Hey, Kokobeel," Izuku called out, as the man sent both Kiba and Kaneko flying, whilst kicking Zenobia to the ground. "What?" he growled angrily as Izuku noticed the smirk on his face angled towards Zenobia, giving Izuku a tick mark on his forehead. "Here's a move that I've been holding back the entire time. You want an opponent who is capable of handling you at full power," Izuku called out as he smiled manically. "There's another move you've kept hidden from me. I'm sure it's nothing I haven't handled before." Kokobeel retorted with an air of smugness. "I'm sure that you like this one, so long as you don't move from your current position," Izuku retorted as the air around Kokobeel distorted. "This move better be worth it. I haven't even been going at full power this entire time." Kokobeel mused as he stood still. "That's all I wanted to hear," Izuku said, sadistic grin on his face. The air all around Kokobeel displaced, and the man actually took note of how they were seeming to warp all around him. Glancing around and looking up at Izuku, he couldn't help the battle-ready smirk coming to his face as the boy was visibly struggling to activate this powerful move he had kept hidden the entire time. That was when he noticed how his power was seemingly beginning to be stolen entirely and was being sealed away from him. Looking at Izuku's smile and the BLD falling down the side of his face, he heard the boy call out the move. "Draconic move, half dimension," Izuku screamed out as a ball of blue and black energy surrounded Kokobeel. The power consumed Kokobeel in his entirety as a massive explosion was about to be created from where he stood. Landing on the ground, not supplying any more energy to the attack, Izuku moved towards Rias and the others and projected a shield of magic around them all. Rias stood on his right, and Zenobia stood on his left, as the two created magic circle from their own hands, projecting a shield to assist. And with a loud crack that broke the sound barrier, the explosion blasted out around the entire school's grounds, even going so far as to break the barrier that had been replaced when Izuku entered the fight against Kokobeel. A large mushroom cloud was what remained of the explosion after Izuku used his most powerful attack against the fallen cadre. The shockwave resulting from the explosion, it broke down Izuku's and Zenobia's barriers that were used to protect them all, with Rias being the last one to actually only crack but hold. Once all the sights in front of them all was over, the group stood in silence, hoping beyond anything that Kokobeel was finally either put down or defeated. Then Kokobeel got up from the ground, his silhouette glaringly noticeable through the smoke and debris blocking their view. A cracking sound was heard as the man walked out of the smoke and debris and into view of the entire group who were fighting against him. He tilted his head, cracking his neck and arms as he stretched his body as though he were preparing for another bout between himself and Izuku as the group entered a combat stance. "You may have sealed most of my power away, but that won't save you," Kokobeel said, sadistic grin on his face. Izuku and the others watched as Kokobeel essentially just started to stretch his limbs in a way that he was about to go through a good workout. Entering a combat stance again, Izuku prepared to launch another series of attacks on Kokobeel before his armor suddenly disappeared in motes of white light and Izuku fell to his knees. He started to breathe heavily as he tried to figure out what in the hell was going on with his body. That was before he realized what Albion warned him about earlier. "You will only have about a minute with this power boost. Do not waste your chance." Albion's voice rang out in the memory. Izuku grunted in effort as he tried to stand back upright, pushing his legs to get him upright. Issei and the others made to his side as they helped him stand upright, as Kokobeel laughed at their panic before walking towards them. His face morphed from being nothing more than a sadistic grin into something far more angered at how Izuku was just staring at him with nothing more than preparation for another fight. "You are not worried about entering another fight with me. Why?" Kokobeel questioned. "No matter how many times you knock me down, I will get back up. I don't care how many times it happens." Izuku panted as Kokobeel watched the group with no emotion on his face. He stood there as the wind brushed the hair of those around, as each of the devils, Izuku and Zenobia, glared at Kokobeel. They were all entering a combat stance in preparation for him to attack them without any kind of mercy on his mind, and Kokobile did just that, rushing towards them with unparalleled speeds. He was about to reach them when an explosion of power landed in front of him. He stopped his movement immediately as the others in the area watched on in confusion before the figure revealed themselves to the group who had been watching in both horror and fear. Rias, however, was watching the new arrival with nothing more than confusion and bewilderment, same for Issei, who had stepped in front of the group in the time that Kokobile got close. To think that someone of your power is having this much trouble with such vermin, the voice said as Izuku stared at the new arrival. His hair was short but silver. It was actually similar in appearance to Issei's. It was combed over, but with a more taken care of look instead of just being very spiky and unkempt before Izuku glanced over at Zenovia, who had the pieces of Excalibur in her grasp. Izuku smiled at her as the young woman moved closer to him, pulling him away from the devils and hugging him as tight as she could before whispering in his ear. "You did well, just rest, Izuku," Zenovia said, whilst kissing his cheek. Izuku blushed crimson at her words before feeling exhaustion take over his form as he fell into her arms. She wrapped her arms around his body as his head fell on her chest, her orbs of flesh hanging from her chest, making the perfect pillow for him as she moved away from the incoming fight between the newcomer and Kokobile. In the time that the newcomer had arrived, Zenovia had brought Izuku over to Irina, who had been unconscious after Kokobile and Valper had used magic to knock her out early on into the fight. She was waking up, however, as she saw Zenovia looking down at Izuku's sleeping form. "He's back. What happened?" Irina asked, confused. "A lot, but Midorikun has managed to unlock Balance Breaker, although it didn't last very long," Zenovia said as she glanced at the fight happening. The newcomer was actually putting Kokobile on the back foot as the fallen angel was having a lot of trouble against him. The two blasted at one another with both opposing forms of magic before the newcomer had arrived and torn the last of Kokobile's wings from his back. The man letting out furious wails of agony as he fell back down to the earth below as the newcomer landed on the ground before using ice magic to encase the madman inside without him being capable of escaping. With Kokobile finished and being taken away by the new arrival, everyone else got right to fixing up the damage. However, Zenovia and Izuku were the only ones who were the problematic parts for the church, as they had been thinking about what to do, and Izuku had long since waken up from a small nap on Zenovia's lap. He was blushing a bit after that, but he was really focused more on the whole holy blades needing to be returned back to the church, so they could be reforged. With that said, and done, those of the church were leaving Kuo town as they were thinking about how to continue on with life outside of Japan. Izuku was moving through the streets, having fallen behind of Zenovia and Irina after a small while. He heard feet tapping the ground not too far away from him, allowing Izuku to turn around to see Issei running over to him and tilting his head to the young man's visage. Izuku nodded to him. The two said nothing as Issei finally got a speaking distance, but kept himself just far enough away that he wanted to let his dragon do the talking as he smacked his left arm, causing the boosted gear to appear on his wrist. "Albion, is our rivalry really that important to you right now?" Drake's voice rang out. "I should be asking you that, Drake." Albion retorted, "My host really just wants to relax during these times of peace, never wanting to do more than be with those he loves." "What say you?" Drake questioned. "My host wishes the same, although he's having far more trouble with coming to terms with his very own emotions." Albion said, chuckling, "I am not in love with them." Izuku said, blushing crimson, "You sure, dude? Because if you're not going to hit that, I will." Issei said with a mirthful expression, "Don't you dare touch them." Izuku retorted before he could even realize what he was even going to retort. What was that?" Izuku asked, looking at his chest and arms. "That's what Albion was mentioning earlier. Just got you to realize it. You view those two as potential lovers. The same for me, except for those in my MSDR's peerage. Aside from Kiba, I'm not sure what to think about him." Issei said, "Honestly, I need to come to terms with that. I've Never felt like this before. Izuku said, looking lost. Well, why don't you just ask them later on? Issei asked, as Izuku stared at him. But would they really like a quirkless person like me? Izuku asked, looking at his hands. Please, I'm pretty sure that they couldn't care less about the quirkless part of your DNA. And if anything, being quirkless doesn't just take away your chance of having a good quirk. Albion boasted as Drake even laughed out loud. What are you talking about? Izuku asked, looking to his right palm. Partner, you're naturally well gifted in the other more reproductive regions when you don't have a quirk. It is due to your body's natural affinity to reproduce without any kind of failure. Albion said, as Izuku blushed even more. See, can we stop talking about this? Izuku asked, rubbing his left arm. Hey, if you need help getting your girls to like you, come to me. I've been getting Ryusbucho liking me for a while. Issei said, as Izuku shuddered slightly. And no thanks, but thank you for the thought. Izuku said, as Issei nodded. Will we have another battle? Drake asked. That all relies on our partners. Albion stated. I'd rather not get into an unnecessary fight, especially with the red one. Izuku said, as he held his hand out to Issei. The young man closed the distance, immediately shaking Izuku's hand before pulling him into a hug. Izuku froze in the hug almost immediately, as he didn't know what to do in the moment, and another thought occurred to him in the moment as unknown to either of them. Tears were falling from Izuku's eyes. When was the last time someone hugged me like this? It feels so welcoming. Izuku thought to himself before the two pulled away and walked away. As Izuku walked away from the Red Dragon Emperor, he came across two people who had blocked his path. The boy was struggling to stop his river of tears falling from his eyes, trying to get the warmth of the hug, something he hadn't felt in a decade ever since he was left all on his own. And as he looked up to see two people staring at him in intrigue, he jumped back a little, entering a combat stance before the one leaning against a wall just scoffed at him. Although the taller and more passive-looking man just smirked at Izuku with no malicious intent in his eyes as Izuku appraised him. That was a nice little talk between both Dragon Emperors of this generation. It's good to know that some of you actually want some of this peace that has been happening. I'm sure that you don't know who I am, and I only wish to assist you in getting to learn more about your sacred gear. Midoriya Izuku, the man said, as 12 black wings as appealing as the night sky fluttered out from his back. Huh? Izuku asked, as his entire body trembled in fear. Zenovia and Irina had landed next to him on both sides of his trembling form as they glared at the man. What is the leader of the Grigori doing here? Zenovia called out, stepping in front of Izuku. What I'm doing here is making sure that a subordinate is taken care of. He wasn't placed here under my instructions, and I will be giving him a lot of punishment. The man said, with a wave of his hand. How can we know that you weren't trying to convert Midoriya-kun to your side? Irina called out, as Izuku watched the man closely. Because you three wouldn't even come close to even putting a dent in his defense. The man to the side said, as he revealed 8 devil wings sprouting from his own back. What do you want? Izuku asked a little meekly. I just want to help this current generation's Hakuryuko become as strong as possible. The man said, as Izuku questioned him one more time. What's your name? I don't want to hear more until I at least know who you are. Izuku said, as he pushed up between both girls. All you wish to know is my name? Well, that's simple. My name is Azazel, and I am the leader of the fallen angels. The man, no Azazel, said, with a smirk on his face. This marks the end of part 1 of What If Deku Became the White Dragon Emperor. A big thanks to NINJ45 Word for granting the permission to feature this amazing fanfiction. Please like the video and subscribe to Deku Universe for more interesting stories. Thank you and see you soon.